Chapter 256. It was May. Even in the Nanping mansion, the charcoal braziers had long been removed. Juicy had mixed some mint into the duheng incense that Xiahou Qing was used to. On this early summer night, it was refreshing and pleasant, curling up in spirals. However, there was a place in the harem that, even in the hottest summer, when one stepped in, it would still make one shiver abruptly and feel cold from the depths of their hearts. Empress Cao's face was cold as she stepped through the threshold of the withered vermilion paint. She stepped over pieces of broken and missing bricks and walked into the tomb-like palace. There was no heat or candlelight in the palace. There was only an old and hoarse voice singing a tuneless nursery rhyme in a low voice. Lingshan guard, several times we met in the dream. Couldn't bear to put down the brush, paper full of blood and tears. Lingshan guard, every blade of grass and every tree is haggard. It is said that Lingshan is 1,000 feet high, and it is difficult to find a red rose. Lingshan guard, how many feelings are in the world? Every day in the sky, I see wild geese flying to the south, but I don't see old friends, my heart is broken. The palace maids held the lamp. Empress Cao walked in front of a shabby cupboard in the midst of the noisy and ear-piercing nursery rhyme. She raised her chin. The palace servants accompanying her immediately moved the cupboard aside and found the deposed concubine Jiangshi hiding behind it. Jiangshi had a head of messy white hair and wore an old palace dress. She held an ugly doll carved from wood in her arms. It had no eyes or nose, only a large mouth drawn. There was a pool of blood-red paint on the side of the mouth. It looked particularly frightening at night. However, she turned a blind eye to it. Instead, she treated it like a treasure in the world, holding the doll in her arms and gently shaking it. Empress Cao lowered her eyes and expressionlessly looked at her almost crazy appearance. Her voice was like cold steel. "It's you, right?" Jiangshi turned a deaf ear and continued to hum her messy rhyme. Lingshan guard, the annual cold star falls. Last year's star was in the north, but who is this year's cold star? Empress Cao bent down and grabbed her arm. She pulled her out of the dark corner and pulled her to her feet. Jiang Chisu, don't pretend to be deaf and mute. You're the one who's been sneaking around behind my back. You're the one who's been playing tricks, aren't you? Jiangshi stared at her with those empty eyes. She did not speak and was also like a wooden person. This hellish cold palace had long turned her from a stunning beauty into a withered old woman. Only the outline of her face could be vaguely recognized. When she was young, she was once the most beautiful rose in this harem. Are you afraid? After a long while, she slowly laughed. Her empty face looked particularly frightening at this moment. She approached Empress Cao's eyes and whispered, "So you also know fear?" "Ha ha ha, our great Yu dynasty's most honorable empress, whose hands are stained with the blood of so many people, unexpectedly also know fear. Baby, did you hear that? It's too funny, ha 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 ha." Empress Cao fiercely slapped her face. "What is there to be afraid of? Simply absurd, slap her face." Several palace maids immediately stepped forward and grabbed Jiangshi. One slap after another landed on Jiangshi's face. Soon, her face was swollen. In the midst of the slapping, Empress Cao sternly said, "At that time, that slut who pretended to be consort Wan suddenly committed suicide in the cold palace. As for old Princess Yu, I remember that you were close friends with her when you were young, and your relationship was very close. Did you do something to both of these things? How did you get the plum blossom kiss?" Jiangshi spat out a mouthful of blood from her mouth dizzily. She smiled and said, "Guess." Empress Cao also smiled. Her smile was incomparably cold. She whispered, "Then you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit." She coldly waved her wide sleeves. Cai Bin immediately understood and stepped forward. She snatched the wooden doll that Jiangshi was holding tightly. Starting from the four limbs, she broke them one by one and crushed them under her feet. Jiangshi immediately collapsed. She desperately struggled. Snot and tears flowed down her face. Her forehead hit the ground. "I was wrong. I was wrong. Give my baby back to me. Empress, I admit my mistake. I didn't do it. I don't know what happened. I was trapped in this cold palace every day. I didn't know what happened outside. It really wasn't me, it wasn't my baby. Admiring her crying appearance, Empress Cow narrowed her eyes as if she was thinking about something. After a moment, she finally ordered people to let go. Jiangshi crawled like a dog to the broken doll and wailed in pain. Empress Cow lowered her head to look at her. Her lips hooked into a smile. Her eyes were sharper and more ruthless than a blade. Whether it was you or not, Ben Gong is not afraid. 22 years ago, you lost to me. In this life, you are destined to be defeated by me. Someone come. Continue to serve her well for this consort. You must serve her until she doesn't fall ill or suffer any disasters and lives a long life. This consort wants her to personally witness the day this consort's child ascends to the throne and this consort ascends to the position of Empress Dowager. Chapter 257. After the sunset, it was indeed a clear night. After dinner, Xiahou Qingqing coughed softly. The new little guard of the Nanping mansion, Ning Shu, twitched her mouth and respectfully helped the prince to move to the Chuanqing pavilion. At the same time, she counted it as digestion. Ning Shu had been here several times, but this was the first time she stopped to admire the pavilions. The long corridor was filled with lush flowers and plants, exuding a faint fragrance. The long corridor spread out in all directions. Under the slightly slanted eaves that were shaped like swallowtails, there were many palace lanterns, illuminating the entire Nanping mansion as if it was daytime. The moon above her head gradually brightened, and the stars gradually extinguished. Under the palace lanterns, there were long tassels that fluttered gently in the wind, tickling Ning Shu's cheeks. She raised her head to look at one of the palace lanterns and saw that the immortal's hand was pointing at the moon. Under such circumstances, there was an indescribable feeling. Ning Shu found it very interesting and subconsciously said, "Your Highness, look." Before she finished speaking, she stopped because she suddenly remembered that this immortal-like man standing under the lanterns couldn't see anything. A faint sourness filled her heart. Xiahou Qing turned his face. "What's the matter?" Ning Shu reacted and hurriedly said, "Nothing. I just suddenly remembered that Hui Mo told me that Your Highness encountered a new trouble and needed my assistance. I wanted to ask what kind of trouble it is." Xiahou Qing's white jade-like face flashed with an unfathomable expression. "That trouble is in the Chuanqing pavilion. You will know when you arrive later." Ning Shu, who had her curiosity piqued, no longer had the leisure to wander around the mansion. She quickened her pace and went straight to the Chuanqing pavilion. Xiahou Qing, who was being supported by her, frowned. "What's the hurry? That trouble doesn't have legs and won't run away." Ning Shu said seriously, "As the saying goes, curiosity kills the cat. But my cat is different from ordinary cats. If my curiosity isn't satisfied, I will die even faster." Even Xiahou Qing revealed a rare look of speechlessness. The lanterns in the Chuanqing pavilion were already lit. Seeing them come in, Ju Sai bent down to set up the tea set, and then helped Xiahou Qing to sit under the west screen window, where he was accustomed to sitting. "Juicy, take that thing out." "Yes." Ju Sai walked to the treasure shelf with his back facing Ning Shu. He pressed a button somewhere and a small box popped out. Ju Sai brought the box to Ning Shu and opened it. A piece of paper. Ning Shu's curiosity was piqued. She took it out and read it out slowly. "If you want to solve the mystery of the plum blossom kiss, marry Changping first. Then you'll find the answer." Ning Shu's eyes widened in astonishment. "This is..." Xiahou Qing rolled up his sleeves and slowly ground his tea. 3 days ago, this note suddenly appeared on my desk. There was no seal, no signature, and only a few words. Ning Shu subconsciously took 2 steps forward and asked, "Your Highness, did you find out who did it?" Then she realized that this question was too stupid. If they could find out who did it, this trouble wouldn't be a problem. She turned her mind and carefully observed the handwriting on the note in her hand. Just from the handwriting alone, it should be written by a woman. She used the popular hairpin-style small regular script in the boudoir. It was neat and tidy, and the strokes were neat. She was gentle and beautiful without losing her heroic spirit. She should be a person with a strong temperament. From the content of the note, It is obvious that she knows something about the secret of the plum blossom kiss and is preparing to use it as a trump card to threaten your highness. In addition, she didn't call the 13th princess by her honorific title, but by her maiden name, Changping. She is either a sister or an elder of the 13th princess. The only person who knows the 13th princess's feelings for your highness and is willing to painstakingly plan for her to fulfill her wish is Xiahou Qing. Put down the teacup in his hand. The silver pot on the red clay stove next to him was already making light sounds. He wasn't in a hurry and waited patiently. I sent Tian Wen to sneak into Prince Yu's residence and take a copy of old Princess Yu's handwriting. It is exactly the same as the handwriting on the note. Chapter 258. But old Princess Consort Yu is already dead. Ning Shu frowned. 9 days ago, she died in front of her eyes. That was irrefutable. Xiahou Qing nodded in agreement, so, it can't be old Princess Consort Yu's doing. Then there's only one explanation. Old Princess Consort Yu prepared this note before she died, and then arranged for someone to sneak into the prince's mansion and leave it there. Ning Shu thought for a moment before asking, then 3 days ago, did anyone visit the prince's mansion? There was one. It was an envoy from southern Yang who came to the capital. He was very obsessed with chess. Because he heard that my skills were outstanding, he specially sent a letter to play a game with me. However, after he finished his lunch, he left. The time of his departure was not past the hour of the sun, and the time of this note was at the 3rd quarter of the sun. The envoy from southern Yang originally came to ask for the princess's hand in marriage, and the 13th princess was the chosen candidate for this marriage. He had no reason to take the initiative to destroy this marriage. Moreover, the time doesn't match, so the possibility of it being him is very small. Ning Shu slowly shook her head, rejecting this too obvious guess. She hurriedly scooped some water from the water mirror beside her, dipped her finger in it, and repeatedly wrote on the small table in front of her, the 3rd quarter of the sun. That's about the same time as the current time. The water in the silver pot boiled, and the sound of bubbles popping could be heard. Jusai bent down and carefully handed the handle of the pot to Xiahou Qing. His slender fingers held the small pot, and slowly poured the water from the pot into the freshly ground tea bowl. Yes, because every day before going to sleep at the hour of the sun, I would come here to grind tea or sit for a while. Ning Shu gently tilted her head. Your Highness, have you ever told anyone about this habit? I mean, other than the people in the prince's mansion. Xiahou Qing slightly raised his chin and asked, do you know? Ning Shu shook her head. The sound of the water continued to flow. Xiahou Qing's voice was low, then there's no one else. It sounded like a casual sentence, but for some reason, it suddenly made Ning Shu blush a little. His words just now seemed to imply that if she didn't know about it, no one else had the right to know about it. She knew many things that other people didn't know about like the back of her hand. He had thousands of secrets, and if he had to find someone to share them with, it could only be her. He had clearly only said a few words. How could she make so many connections? Perhaps he didn't have any of these intentions at all. She was just flattering herself. She turned her face to the side and let the breeze outside the window blow away the inexplicable thoughts in her mind. Then, she lowered her head and continued to think about business. She lowered her eyes and walked to Xiahou Qing's side. She knelt down and said in a low voice, so the possibility of this note being written by someone close to your highness is very high. Because other than the people in the Wang Fu, no one could find out the little habits and details of his highness' daily life. So, there are 2 possibilities. First, it was a guard or servant girl in the Wang Fu who was bribed by old Princess Yu to do this. They are familiar with all the big and small affairs in the Wang Fu and are most likely to do this without being noticed. Second, it was a conspiracy. Someone secretly told someone about his highness' daily habits, and that person took the opportunity to sneak into the Wang Fu and put down the note. With the help of the informant, they sneaked out without anyone noticing. Juicy said, the second possibility is impossible. Everyone in the Wang Fu, including the helpers in the kitchen who are responsible for washing vegetables, I know their appearance, habits, family background, and other information by heart. It's impossible for a stranger to sneak in. Moreover, before the incident happened, Hui Mo had always been in the Wang Fu. No one could fool his eyes by disguising themselves, not to mention the 80 guards who randomly patrol the entire Wang Fu every day. Ning Shu's finger tapped on the drawing just now. In that case, it can only be the first possibility. From what I know, most of the people in His Highness's Wang Fu are trusted aides who were brought over from Cloud Swallow Province. However, the Wang Fu is still lacking some people to do chores. Aside from the people who were originally in charge of cleaning and guarding the gates, there are also some people who were arranged by His Majesty's Internal Affairs Department. These two groups of people are more likely to have been bribed by old Princess Yu. Perhaps we can start by investigating them one by one. Also, she paused and suddenly thought of something. However, that thought seemed to be too frightening and she didn't know where to start. In front of her, the finely ground tea powder gave off a refreshing aroma after being brewed in the boiling water. Xiahou Qing took the tea sieve from Juicy and slowly filtered the tea dregs. Other than the soft sound of the green tea flowing through the sieve, the room was silent. Only Ning Shu suddenly clenched her fists and a cold sweat silently formed. After all the steps were completed, Xiahou Qing pushed a cup of fragrant celadon in front of Ning Shu and said, "What else? Why didn't you continue?" Faced with Xiahou Qing's questioning, Ning Shu's thick and long eyelashes fluttered. She took a light breath and said in a voice as low as a mosquito's buzz, "I wanted to say that there might be another possibility, and that is, she wanted to say the words several times, but because it was too scary, she couldn't squeeze them out of her throat. Xiahou Qing smiled and said faintly, "I know what you want to say. You want to say, could the person who put the note be the person who has been hiding by my side and giving me the plum blossom kiss time and time again?" Chapter 259. He said it too casually, but it made Ning Shu clench her fists even tighter, to the point where she felt a slight prickling pain. A person's life started from a newborn baby, grew into an ignorant and tender child, explored the world for the first time, and then became a high-spirited youth. Wu Ling was young in the east of Jin City, riding a silver saddle and white horse in the spring breeze. It should have been a bright and beautiful time, but he was tightly strangled by something called the plum blossom kiss. It was like a ghost claw from hell, stealing away the most important things he walked in the world. From then on, he could not taste 100 flavors, could not smell a fragrance, and all kinds of ugliness had nothing to do with him. The most frightening thing was that the hateful ghost claw had been hiding by his side, ready to steal his next feeling at any time, making him a cripple who had lost all 5 senses. Just thinking about this kind of fear made her hair stand on end. Then, what kind of entanglement would Xiahou Qing, who was really experiencing all of this, have to bear? Taking a sip of tea and putting it down, Xiahou Qing leisurely said, "I actually hope it is this kind." Then, these 11 years of confusion, hesitation, and fear, the mystery that has been trying to torment me every day and night, maybe I can finally solve it before I die. "You won't die," Ning Shu subconsciously shouted with both hands on the table. Seeing the slightly stunned expression on Xiahou Qing's face, Ning Shu realized that she had been a bit too excited. She turned her face away in embarrassment, but after a moment, she said softly but seriously, I will do everything I can to help your highness find out who poisoned you. I will not let your majesty die so easily." Xiahou Qing's light-colored lips lifted slightly, drawing an arc like a warm breeze stirring the spring water. Her fingertips, which were coated with a thin layer of calluses, gently slid the rim of the cup that she had just drunk from. "Then, I'll give myself to you." Ning Shu. The heat that had just disappeared from her face immediately boiled. Was she overthinking things? What he meant was that he was handing his life over to her, but why did it sound like she was imagining things? She raised her head to look at the bright moon in the sky outside the window and said cheerfully, "The moonlight tonight is really nice." Xiahou Qing smiled faintly and said nothing more. After pretending to admire the moon for a while, Ning Shu's gaze returned to the note. "Then, how does your highness intend to deal with the matter on this note?" "I'll leave it to you. What do you think I should do?" Ning Shu looked up at him and carefully said, "If we can really get the secret of the plum blossom kiss, then marrying the 13th princess may be the fastest and cheapest way." Xiahou Qing's faintly discernible smile suddenly froze, turning into an extremely cold sneer. You mean I should accept the threat? She knew that what she was going to say next might make him unhappy, but her rationality told her that even so, she still had to say it. I know your highness hates being threatened, but this may be the only way to solve the mystery and save your highness's life. Since old princess you set up this trap before her death, it must have been carefully planned. If your highness refuses, then... Before she finished speaking, Xiahou Qing had already stood up indifferently. She couldn't see his eyes through the layer of black brocade, but his face seemed to be frozen with a layer of ice as he mocked. Is it that in your heart, it doesn't matter to you who I marry because it has nothing to do with you? Chapter 260. Ning Shu's mouth froze. Seeing Xiahou Qing turning to leave, she was stunned and hurriedly got up to chase after him. No, I don't mean that. I just hope that your highness Xiahou Qing didn't turn his head. His dark robe floated into the night. His voice was as cold as his voice, no need to explain. I don't have the leisure to waste time with you. I want to rest. Juicy, let's go. There was no time to tidy up the things on the table. Juicy waved his hand and asked 2 guards to deal with it. He immediately followed. When he brushed past Ning Shu, Juicy paused for a moment and said softly, "This note appeared 3 days ago, and today is the day His Highness ordered Hui Mo to sneak into the Ministry of Justice's prison to deliver the message. Miss Ning, you have failed His Highness." After Juicy finished speaking, he quickly followed Xiahou Qing's footsteps and helped him into the night of Nanping King's mansion. Ning Shu stood in the same place. Her heart felt like it was pierced by a needle. She couldn't breathe for a moment. She understood what Juicy meant. Xiahou Qing understood what she thought. If he was really afraid of death and accepted the marriage with 13th princess, then he wouldn't have sent Hui Mo to ask her if she was willing to be his future princess consort. It was not that she didn't understand his good intentions, but it was the beginning of summer in the 5th month. The Spring Awakening Pavilion was surrounded by flowers. Ning Shu stood among the flowers and silently looked up at the moon in the sky that was as perfect as a mirror. She said in a low voice, "I only hope that your highness can live on peacefully. Even if we are separated in the future, going in opposite directions, I hope that your highness can appreciate the flowers of Sichuan, look at the sky and clear water, and live a good life in this world." She tossed and turned all night without a good sleep. In her half-awake state, countless images alternated in her mind. In that scene, there were the enchanting and beautiful red spider lilies that bloomed in the netherworld, the purple light that surged between King Chujiang's eyebrows of the 7 reincarnations in the netherworld, the corner of Xiahou Qing's clothes that turned around and left coldly in the Spring Awakening Pavilion, and the note written with a flower hairpin. If you want to solve the mystery of the plum blossom kiss, marry Changping first and you will find the answer. The 17 words joined together to form a piece of cloth with the spell. Bit by bit, it wrapped around her tightly and pulled her into those ominous memories of the past. She remembered that in her previous life, all 372 members of her Ning family had their heads chopped off one by one in front of her eyes. She remembered that Jia had been soaked in an ice-cold water prison, his limbs swollen beyond recognition. She remembered that Xiahou Qing had died at the age of 24. Ning Shu opened her eyes abruptly and gasped for breath. She heard someone knocking on the door. She got up and saw that the small box with the note was still in her hand, placed over her heart. It was this thing that had caused her to have nightmares all night. She sighed softly, locked the small box, put it under the cabinet, and put away the key. The knocking continued outside. She rubbed her dizzy temples and replied, I'm coming. Then she got up and put on the bodyguard uniform to open the door. She asked with hidden bitterness, What's the matter? Standing at the door was an older Mema. Bodyguard Ning, Shizi Yi has already gotten up and is waiting for you to serve him. She looked at Ning Shu from head to toe and added, Don't you know what time it is? How can a master wait for a servant? Ning Shu's scalp went numb. She was really going to be serious. She said anxiously, But this old servant doesn't care what your identity is, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're a beggar or a noble young lady. This old servant only listens to Shizi Yi. If Shizi Yi says that you're a bodyguard of our residence, then you're a bodyguard. Bodyguard Ning, hurry up. The Mema finished speaking methodically and stood at the door with a wooden face. That posture was 10,000 times worse than Juicy. Ning Shu let out a frantic howl in her heart. She resigned herself to her fate and quickly tidied herself up. She used a simple wooden hairpin to tie up her black hair. She didn't have time to boil water, so she used cold water to wipe it clean. Then she hurriedly put on a pair of high-heeled boots and followed the mama out. Chapter 261. Inside the hall, Xiahou Qing had already put on his clothes and was standing in front of the flower and bird rack. He held a handful of bird food in his palm, quietly waiting for the birds that had just woken up to fly down and peck their fill. One of the little birds seemed to have not yet woken up. Its tender yellow beak still had bird food in it. Its little head was nestled in Xiahou Qing's palm and fell asleep. It was naive and cute, making people unable to restrain a smile. Xiahou Qing slid his thumb and gently stroked its head. His attitude was almost gentle, like pure white snow meeting the spring breeze, silently melting thousands of li away. Ning Shu couldn't help but stare blankly. The mama next to her impatiently stepped on her foot to wake her up. Thinking about how she had angered him last night, Ning Shu's heart ached. She shamelessly stepped forward and said with a mischievous smile, "This subordinate pays respect to Shizzy Yi. Today, Shizzy Yi's complexion is even more radiant than last night. Presumably, you had a good rest last night. Your dazzling grace really fills the room. May I ask what Shizzy Yi needs this subordinate to do? This subordinate will listen to Yi's orders." Her flattering tone made Juicy, who had always been expressionless, couldn't help but glance at her. Hearing Ning Shu's voice, Xiahou Qing gently placed the little bird on the flower and bird rack's soft cushion. He turned his head and expressionlessly said, "Wash your hands." He displayed the virtue of cherishing words to the extreme, making it clear that he didn't want her to say another word. The difference between how he treated the bird and how he treated her was so great. His attitude was so cold that Ning Shu was suddenly speechless. She stretched out her hand and was about to say, "This subordinate just washed it before coming down." Xiahou Qing said, "3 times. 3 times. Wouldn't she wash her hands until they were bald?" But when she thought of this person's strange habit of loving cleanliness, strangling someone's neck through a handkerchief, and throwing away the jade pendant that she had touched, she decided to swallow the nonsense back into her stomach. She rubbed the tip of her nose and continued to smile. This subordinate obeys. The warm water in the copper basin had already been prepared. Ning Shu walked over and bathed her hands. She used the fragrant ointment to carefully rub it over. After rinsing it clean, she bathed it in the warm water again. Finally, she wiped it clean with a cloth. "Your Highness, it's done." Xiahou Qing coldly said, "Comb my hair." "All right." Ning Shu found a sandalwood comb by the mirror. She walked behind Xiahou Qing and held his ice-cold hair. Hui Mo's height was already outstanding among ordinary men, but Xiahou Qing was even taller than him by an inch. She used to raise her head to look at him when she talked to him. Although she was wearing a pair of special boots, she was still shorter than him by half a head. She stood behind him and brushed his hair. She had to stand on her tiptoes again to reach the roots of his hair and slowly brush it down. Fortunately, his black hair was as smooth as water, so it was not difficult to comb it. Holding his silky black hair, Ning Shu suddenly realized that this seemed to be the first time in her 7 long lives that she was combing a man's hair. This feeling was somewhat novel and subtle. While she was lost in thought, her fingertips accidentally touched the side of his neck. Xiahou Qing frowned as if he had been electrocuted. He subconsciously pinched her fingers. Ning Shu looked at him with puzzlement. Xiahou Qing pursed his thin lips and released her fingers. He continued to coldly say, "Reckless." But for some reason, his voice was somewhat hoarse. Ning Shu only thought that he meant that she should be careful not to scratch him with her nails. So she quickly said, "Yes, this subordinate will be careful. I won't hurt your highness." They were too close. Her warm and moist breath brushed against the back of his ear and neck, causing a faint scorching heat to surge up in his chest. Xiahou Qing wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he turned his head away and did not speak again. After finishing combing, Ning Shu used Xiahou Qing's ivory hairpin to comb his hair for a long time. Her legs were sore and her hands were numb. She then gloomily stood on the ground and embarrassedly said, "Heir apparent, I'll have to trouble you to bend your knees a little or sit down. You are too tall, this subordinate can't reach you." Xiahou Qing lightly snorted and said, "It's your legs that are too short." Ning Shu choked and the corner of her mouth couldn't help but twitch. This subordinate will do her best to grow taller in the next life. I won't lose face for your highness. His Highness finally magnanimously sat down and let Ning Shu tie up his hair. Then he waved his sleeve, indicating that she should serve him breakfast. Peach blossom noodles, lotus cakes, osmanthus tea cakes, first-grade cakes, 12 dishes were served one by one. Ning Shu faithfully played the role of his little bodyguard. She tried her best to serve him happily so that he would be magnanimous enough to forget last night's unhappiness. Unfortunately, who was Xiahou Qing? How could he be so easily coaxed? One moment he was picky about the peach blossom noodles being too hot, the next moment he was picky about the cheese being too cold, the next moment the tea cakes were not crispy enough, and the next moment he said the first-grade cakes were too hard. Ning Shu was like a spinning top, being ordered around in circles. Her forehead was covered in sweat as she carefully held the fermented rice white jade balls that had just been made in the kitchen. This was already the 8th time she had gone to the kitchen to get a new dish. She just sat next to the kitchen maid and watched her make it. It was completely according to Xiahou Qing's requirements. It was cooked with a moderate amount of hardness and light flavor. She carefully blew on it and brought it over. When she stepped over the threshold, she saw that the little sparrow that had been eating and sleeping in her palm had finally woken up. It flapped its wings and intimately flew to its master's shoulder. It used its fluffy head to gently rub against the side of its master's neck. Xiahou Qing, who had always been picky with her, had an indulgent smile on his face. Ning Shu's hand that was holding the fermented rice white jade balls paused. Her face was stiff. A few words silently flashed through her mind. A person is inferior to a bird. A person is inferior to a bird. What does fried oriole taste like? I want to know. Chapter 262. For 3 days in a row, no matter how much Ning Shu tried to be submissive, Xiahou Qing didn't give her any face. Even the mama who knocked on the door to wake her up early looked at her with her nose in the air every day. Ning Shu asked the other servants in private and found out that this mama had served Xiahou Qing since he was a child and had an extraordinary relationship with Xiahou Qing. It would be strange if she didn't give a smile to Ning Shu, who made her family's Shizhi unhappy. It wasn't until 3 days later that Ning Shu, who had dressed herself simply like the previous few days, walked into the hall and found that Xiahou Qing had already finished his meal. Hearing her footsteps, he threw away the last few pieces of bird food in his hand and said, "Let's go." "You're leaving the food today? Is something the matter?" It was already warm outside. Walking a few steps under the sun would cause one to sweat, so it wasn't convenient to wear a fox fur coat. Xiahou Qing took a piece of fake skin from Juicy and stuck it on the side of his neck to cover the 3 blood-red plum blossoms. "Today is the day of old Princess Yu's funeral," he said. Ning Shu made an ah sound and suddenly realized that it had already been half a month since old Princess Yu passed away. "Time really passed quickly. I have to go." She nodded and murmured. Suddenly, she remembered that she forgot to take something and hurriedly ran back to her room. "Your Highness, please wait a moment. This subordinate will be back soon." A moment later, she ran back, panting. She was already sweating profusely. Hearing her hurried breathing, Xiahou Qing raised his eyebrows. "What is so important that you can't leave?" Ning Shu stuffed the thing into her sleeve and said carelessly, "Nothing, nothing. It's just a little girl's thing." Xiahou Qing didn't pursue the matter. He raised his hand and said, "Let's go." Ning Shu immediately understood and walked over to support him. After helping Xiahou Qing onto the carriage, Ning Shu also stepped onto the step stool. She was hesitating whether she should sit in the carriage or outside. Logically speaking, with her current identity as a small imperial bodyguard of the South Pacifying King's estate, she shouldn't have entered the carriage. She thought about it and decided not to provoke Xiahou Qing. It was better to sit outside with Juicy and drive the car. However, the sun was too hot today. After being exposed to the sun for a whole day, her snow-white skin, which she was proud of, would probably become charcoal. Sigh. She had just sat down next to Juicy when she heard Xiahou Qing's impatient urging voice. What are you doing outside? Come in. Hey. Ning Shu was stunned for a moment before she hurriedly lifted the curtain and entered. Xiahou Qing casually pointed at the red-painted wooden box he had prepared in advance on the small table. Although he still did not smile, his tone was not as cold as it had been a few days ago. I didn't tell you in advance that I was going out today. Open it. Here's your breakfast. Eat. Ning Shu was instantly overwhelmed by the favor. Did this mean that his anger was finally appeased? Ning Shu let out a long sigh of relief in her heart with tears streaming down her face. She covered her chest and gave a big smile. Many thanks, Your Highness. It was just ordinary porridge with 2 side dishes. Ning Shu ate with relish, not even leaving a drop of rice soup behind. She only felt that the most delicious and comfortable thing she had eaten since her rebirth was this bowl of porridge in her hands. Hearing the purposeful sound of satisfaction she made after eating, Xiahou Qing's lips curved into a faintly discernible curve. When Ning Shu raised her head, it suddenly disappeared. His Majesty finally decided to bury old Princess Yu in old Prince Yu's tomb with him. The pomegranate flowers in May gradually bloomed around the royal tomb. They were like a burning flame, and also like the scarlet cloak that they had once stood side by side on the battlefield to boost morale. This cloak was once damaged and thrown away. Today, it was finally mended and covered their bodies. Ning Shu stood under a pomegranate tree and looked at the coffin being sent into the tunnel of the mausoleum. For a moment, she was filled with emotion. When the ceremony ended and everyone dispersed, Xiahou Qing was held back by the Southern Yang envoy who had also come to observe the ceremony. Ning Shu walked alone to old Princess Yu's tombstone and bowed deeply. She said in a low voice, "Old Princess Yu, Ning Shu boldly came to send you off. Please don't blame me. I have returned the silver lock that you left for Wen Siren back to her coffin as an apology. This life is long and bitter. I hope that in your next life, you will be worry-free and smooth." After she finished bowing, she stood on her tiptoes and looked into the distance among the scattered crowd. Finally, under an inconspicuous small tree, she found 13th Princess Xiao Zhongping hiding behind the shadow of the tree and secretly crying. Chapter 263. Ning Shu took the handkerchief from her bosom and walked over. Then she remembered that she was dressed as a guard of the Nanping prince's estate, so it was inconvenient for her to step out of line. She could only take back the handkerchief and bow, saying softly, "Your Highness, please restrain your grief." Xiao Zhongping's gaze stiffly landed on old Princess Yu's tombstone. She revealed a mournful self-deprecating expression. "What grief can I restrain? Firstly, I am not of old Princess Yu's bloodline. Secondly, I am not a trusted subordinate of Prince Yu's estate. I am just an outsider who was favored by the heavens and taken care of by her for 6 years. Soon, when I marry into Southern Yang, I won't even be the princess of Great Yu anymore. How can I restrain my grief?" Looking at the 2 streams of hot tears on her face, Ning Shu silently thought to herself, "You have the right. No one in this world is more qualified than you. Even before your maternal grandmother died, she was still making plans for your lifelong happiness. It's a pity that this is a secret that concerns the dignity of the imperial family. I'm afraid I can't let you know in this lifetime." The tombstone didn't speak. The pomegranate flowers bloomed by themselves. Ning Shu also didn't speak. She silently accompanied Xiao Zhongping for a long time. When her tears ran out, Xiao Zhongping took the handkerchief from a palace maid and wiped her tears clean. Only then did she realize that someone was standing beside her. She looked at Ning Shu and felt that she looked vaguely familiar. However, Ning Shu's face had changed. She didn't remember anyone in her memory. Then she looked at the style of clothes Ning Shu was wearing and asked, "You are from the Nanping Prince's estate? Your Highness is smart." Thinking of that person, Xiao Zhongping's breathing couldn't help but stagnate. She sadly and uncontrollably asked, "Why are you looking for me? Did the heir tell you to pass a message to me?" "Reporting to Your Highness, it's like this. This lowly one has an extremely important matter to ask for your advice. If you are willing to trust the heir and this lowly one, Could your highness please dismiss the surrounding people and talk to this lowly one in private? Noticing the vigilance in Xiao Zhangping's eyes, Ning Shu added, if your highness has any doubts, you can check the authenticity of my waist token. You can also send someone to stand guard 5 zhong away. If I do anything improper, you can immediately arrest me. Xiao Zhongping frowned and asked in confusion, what is it that must be said in private and not in public? Ning Shu glanced at the eunuchs beside Xiao Zhongping who were looking at her strangely. She lowered her head and thought for a moment. She hurriedly ran to the mage who had just presided over the funeral and borrowed a charcoal pencil to write a few words on her palm. She then ran back and half opened her palm in front of Xiao Zhongping. When Xiao Zhongping saw the words on her palm, his expression changed. He immediately said, the rest of you, retreat 30 meters away. Without my order, don't come near. The palace maids had no choice but to obey. After pulling Ning Shu to the shade of a tree, Xiao Zhongping clenched his fists and asked anxiously, what did you write on your hand mean? The mystery of old princess consort Yu's death, didn't she die from being stung by poisonous bees while protecting imperial father? Ning Shu shook her head lightly, this lowly one is unable to tell your highness the specific details. Otherwise, your highness will be implicated. Old princess consort Yu definitely didn't want to see that result. This lowly one can only say that she died for love. Before she died, she was still filled with concern for you. Why should I believe you? Ning Shu said in a low voice, because I was there at the time and saw it with my own eyes. When old princess consort Yu was dying, she ordered me to pass on a message to your highness, may my Zhongping live a life of freedom. When she heard this, the tears that Xiao Zhongping had just stopped gushed out again. She said in a trembling voice, so you were the one who threw the note that day. Chapter 264. No one born in the imperial family was stupid. She already felt that Qi Zhaoyu's sudden death, imperial concubine Qi's sudden illness after returning to the palace, and imperial father's tight-lipped refusal to ask about what happened that day were all very strange. After hearing Ning Shu's words today, she quickly came up with a guess. Could it be that she wanted to avenge me? In a sense, this was not wrong. Ning Shu did not deny it. Poison imperial concubine Qi wanted to avenge Wen Siren, and Qi Zhaoyu was also involved in the plot. It was not without the intention of paving the way for Xiao Zhongping. Xiao Zhongping covered her eyes and cried silently. Large drops of tears fell through the gaps between her fingers and fell to the ground, wetting the soil. Her heart was filled with sorrow and guilt, but after hearing about old princess consort Yu's sudden death, her empty heart seemed to be filled with a lot of love, so she did not look around blankly, as if she was in an ice cave. After a long time, she stopped crying. What do you want to ask? Ask, if I know. After confirming that there was no one around, Ning Shu said, may I ask your highness, did old princess consort Yu mention something called the plum blossom kiss to you when she was alive? Xiao Zhongping wiped her tears and shook her head. What is that? I have never heard of it. Her expression was very blank, and did not seem to be fake. Ning Shu continued to ask, or is it related to plum blossoms? Xiao Zhongping lowered her head and thought for a long time, then shook her head. No, she did not like plum blossoms, and there are no decorations related to plum blossoms in the Fu. Oh, right, there seems to be a painting of the 4 gentlemen in the parlor, but isn't that a very rare and ordinary painting? I did not notice anything different about it. Ning Shu refused to give up and asked again, then in the words she has said to you recently, is there anything different from the past that has caught your attention? Xiao Zhangping's heart skipped a beat and her eyes filled with tears again. She clutched her chest and said intermittently, that period of time was when Qi Zhuanyu went missing in Wenfang Hall and went crazy after being framed. No matter if it was in the palace or in the marketplace, there were rumors that it was my doing. Even Fu Huang was colder to me than usual. I was very depressed and washed my face with tears every day. Only she patiently comforted me and accompanied me every day. I was in such a bad mood that I didn't notice anything unusual about her. I only remember that on the night before her accident, it was already late at night, but she didn't leave. She hugged me on her lap like when I was young and caressed my back. She even sang me a nursery rhyme that used to coax me to sleep. In my days, I seemed to hear her whisper in my ear that everything would be all right when I woke up. But I didn't expect that when I really woke up, she was already. I was so stupid. I wasted her love for me. Ning Shu racked her brains again and thought of many questions to try to make her remember something useful. Unfortunately, it all ended in failure. Ning Shu rubbed her temples and shut her mouth. She was extremely depressed. Xiao Zhongping thought for a moment and said, "Is the thing that you want to know very important to the heir?" Ning Shu took a deep breath and nodded solemnly. "Yes, very important. I have no way to ask anyone for help. I can only ask your highness for help." Xiao Zhongping said, "I understand. I will go back and think about it carefully. I will also look for the things that old princess you left at my place. If I find it, I will tell you as soon as possible." Ning Shu took a step back and clasped her hands together. She bowed deeply to her. "Many thanks, Your Highness." Chapter 265. When Ning Shu thanked Xiao Zhongping, she glanced around and found that Xiao Yuni was looking at them suspiciously. Ning Shu's heart skipped a beat. She quickly said goodbye to Xiao Zhongping and blended into the crowd. She searched for Xiahou Qing in the crowd for a long time but couldn't find him. She thought he had returned to his residence first. However, when she turned a corner, she found that outstanding figure under a willow tree. He was still being pestered by the envoys of the southern Yang kingdom. There was another person standing beside him. It was the eldest son of the Prime Minister, Tan Xixian. Ning Shu had seen him before at the banquet at the third prince's residence. He was handsome and somewhat similar to Tan Siwei, but his pair of slightly raised peach blossom eyes added a bit of charm. It was easy to tell the difference between the two brothers. This person's temperament was also unusual. He didn't follow in the footsteps of his father and brother to participate in the imperial examinations and become an official. Instead, he became a merchant. He was tactful and funny. With the Prime Minister's residence as his backing, he made a name for himself in the capital. In the past, he had a good relationship with Xiao Yunyang. After Xiao Yunyang fell from power, he quickly climbed up to Xiao Yunsu. Their relationship was very close. At the same time, he was also very close to the envoy from southern Yang. He often took the envoy to tour the capital under the guise of enjoying the capital's scenery, but in reality, he was admiring all the courtesans in the capital. With Xiahou Qing's cold temperament, he would be annoyed after being pestered for so long. However, due to his identity as the envoy, he couldn't refute in front of everyone. Ning Shu snickered. After thinking about it, she still walked forward to fulfill her responsibility as a loyal guard of the prince's residence. She cupped her hands and said, "This little one greets the lords. Heir, the carriage is ready. You forgot to take your medicine today, so you should return home early." The envoy's words were interrupted. His gaze fell on Ning Shu. He raised his eyebrows and said curiously, "Your Highness is very elegant. I didn't expect that the little guard beside you is also not ordinary. These hands are white and tender, even more delicate than a normal girl's." As the envoy spoke, he reached out to pat the back of Ning Shu's hand. Ning Shu was alerted and immediately retreated. After saluting, she took a step back and walked to Xiahou Qing's side. Xiahou Qing's sharp ears caught her little panic and casually said, "He's the one in charge of tying up my hair. If his hands are rough, then that person would be crippled. How could he be worthy of staying in my southern pacifying king's mansion?" The envoy laughed. "What the crown prince said makes sense. If it were a rough man with calloused hands, his hair would be pulled out when he combed his hair. Ha 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 ha." The envoy threw his head back and laughed out loud as he said something that only he found interesting. After a moment, his eyes once again swept over to Ning Shu. Looking at this little bodyguard who could only be considered delicate and pretty, but with a slender figure, he suddenly felt a sense of charm and gentleness in his heart. The Great Yu is indeed a land of outstanding heroes. Talented people are everywhere. Being tied up by such a soft hand, the feeling must be extraordinary. The contempt in his words was very obvious, which made Xiahou Qing frown unhappily. Tan Xixian was a smart person and immediately mediated the situation. "It's getting late. The crown prince needs to take his medicine first." Sir Envoy, why don't we disturb the Crown Prince some other day and continue to ask him for advice on chess? After he finished speaking with a smile, he leaned close to the envoy's ear and whispered, "The Great You has countless talented people. It's easy to find a pair of soft hands to comb your hair. Sir Envoy, don't worry. I'll definitely find one that you'll be satisfied with." The envoy laughed and said to Xiahou Qing, "Mr. Tan is right. Then I won't delay the Crown Prince from taking his medicine. When the Crown Prince is free, I'll host a banquet at Xuanfeng Terrace. I'll definitely invite the Crown Prince." The wolf and the bay finally left together with their arms around each other's shoulders. Ning Shu exhaled softly and said shamefully, "I was careless. I didn't expect to make a mistake in my hands. Fortunately, Your Highness helped me in time." Chapter 266. Xiahou Qing coldly said, "It's good that you know. In the future, when you go out with me, remember your identity as a bodyguard. When you shouldn't interrupt, firmly shut your mouth. Lower your head and listen closely behind me. If there's a next time, think of a way yourself. I won't interfere." Ning Shu muttered in her heart, "Wasn't I trying to help you out and let you get rid of that pervert's entanglement? I only did something bad with good intentions. Is there a need to scold me so seriously?" But she tactfully admitted defeat. She lowered her head and mumbled, "Yes, this subordinate will remember." Listening to her obviously perfunctory answer, Xiahou Qing's chest, that cluster of nameless fire, rushed up again. He also knew that the disturbance just now wasn't Ning Shu's fault. He shouldn't blame her, but the unhappiness in his heart still couldn't disperse. This unhappiness continued until they boarded the carriage. He noticed that Ning Shu didn't say a word and almost squeezed herself into the corner of the carriage. He frowned. "Why are you sitting so far away? Aren't you afraid that the carriage will hit your head while adjusting the speed? It's okay to hit your head, but it's bad luck to touch your head." Ning Shu gave a hollow laugh. "It's okay, this subordinate will pay attention. Shiziyi, please sit more spacious." Xiahou Qing realized that he couldn't control his emotions and let her perceive and misunderstand. He gently took a breath in the breeze that blew in through the window and softly said, "The matter just now wasn't your fault. It was also my negligence. In the future, when the Southern Yang envoys come to visit, they will all say that I'm not feeling well and can't see them. As for your hands, there are many gloves in the ink room. You can just take a pair and wear them." The air pressure in the carriage finally returned to normal. Ning Shu carefully observed his expression and finally relaxed. She sat opposite him and poured 2 cups of tea. One for herself and the other for him. It could be considered a reconciliation. Xiahou Qing took the teacup she handed over and took a sip. He suddenly laughed. What was the inexplicable sulk just now? It was somewhat like a woman in the marketplace who saw her husband being entangled by other women and made trouble for no reason. He, Xiahou Qing, had actually fallen to such a state. It was simply ridiculous. What was even more ridiculous was that the person who made him drink this bucket of vinegar, she didn't know anything. Putting down the porcelain cup in his hand, Xiahou Qing slowly rubbed the palm bone that had accompanied him for many years and said, "Where did you go just now? Are we going to look for Xiao Zhongping?" Ning Shu's heart was torn again when he saw through her little trick. This subordinate acted on her own initiative. "Please forgive me, Your Highness." Xiahou Qing sneered from the bottom of his throat. "Am I such an unreasonable person in your mind? Tell me, what did you find out?" Ning Shu shook her head regretfully. "Just now, as the heir's personal bodyguard, I asked Princess Changping if she had heard of the plum blossom kiss from old Princess Yu. It's a pity that she hasn't remembered anything yet. However, I still feel that the crux of this matter lies firmly with Princess Changping. The reason?" She dipped the cup in water and slowly organized her thoughts. "Previously, I guessed that the person who left the note might be the one who poisoned the air all this time. However, after a few nights of deep thought, I rejected this idea. The reason is that the two of them have different goals. The person who poisoned you all this time has a very simple goal, to torture you until the day of your death. But old Princess Consort Yu was different. Since she wanted to marry Princess Quan Quan Ping and have her become your Shizi consort, then she definitely didn't want to see her most beloved granddaughter become a widow at a young age. Therefore, she secretly revealed this secret, hoping that Shizzy would be cured of the poison after marrying the princess and would grow old with the princess. One wants you to die, the other wants you to live. Old princess, you isn't a fool. How could she let the other party discover her goal? Let's return to the plum blossom kiss. 25 years ago, the previous emperor was poisoned to death by the plum blossom kiss, which directly led to the change of the throne. Old princess, you were someone who personally experienced it and naturally knew that this secret was no small matter. The person who left the note might be someone she trusted, but how could she guarantee that this person wouldn't betray her? Moreover, her only blood relative in this world is Princess Changping. Other than Changping, I can't think of anyone else she can be more assured of. In the end, the contents of the note were, if you want to solve the mystery of the plum blossom kiss, marry Changping first. Then you will find the answer. The meaning of the words find the answer is really thought-provoking. You don't need to ask too many questions to get the answer. This is what it means to find the answer. Thus, I'm guessing that she might have hidden the secret in one of Princess Changping's personal belongings, or... Ning Shu raised her head and secretly glanced at Xiahou Qing, a faint blush appearing on her cheeks. In that case, after marrying you, it will naturally appear in front of you. Chapter 267. In the capital, Ning Shu was undoubtedly the most authoritative when it came to marriage. After all, she had experienced 3 husbands, and there was no one in the entire Great Yu who was more experienced than her. However, her experience had always been focused on theory. She had never even seen a pig run before, let alone personally eat that piece of meat. Therefore, after she vaguely finished speaking, the carriage immediately filled with an awkward atmosphere, causing her to feel uncomfortable. She lightly coughed and skipped this subtle topic. She said, of course, there is another possibility. She clearly knows what the secret is, but deliberately didn't tell me. She wants to use this as a bargaining chip to marry into the Prince of Nanping's residence. However, from her expression just now, it doesn't seem like. Before she could finish speaking, Xiahou Qing shook his head and said, impossible. Her personality has always been simple and straightforward, without any shrewdness. There is no way she can hide such a big secret. Moreover, old princess consort, you will be worried that if we tell her directly, she won't be able to conceal it and will be exposed, causing a fatal disaster. Ning Shu was stunned for a moment, unable to organize her words. After a while, she said, I think so too, so we still have to focus on the princess's personal belongings. However, Her Highness is currently living in the palace, and because of the upcoming marriage, there are many female officials around her. There are many spies, so it will be difficult to sneak in and find it. It was really depressing to always think of the worst. She thought for a moment, then said with enthusiasm, of course, if we can find the person who put the note, we might be able to find some unexpected clues. However, before that, we can only hope that the princess will take the initiative to tell us after discovering it, or, Xiahou Qing asked, or what? She shrank back and carefully said, I can only inconvenience Shizzy Yi to use a handsome man trick. Out. Just as she finished joking, a golden bead was flicked onto her forehead, causing her to hold her head in pain. Xiahou Qing sneered, it seems that you have been in the residence for a few days, but you still don't know the rules of the residence. What kind of punishment is it to casually make fun of your master? Juicy, after returning to the residence, watch her copy the rules of the residence 10 times. If she can't finish, she won't be able to sleep tonight. Outside the carriage, Ju Sai, who was driving, hesitated for a moment. In the end, he respectfully replied, yes. Ning Shu said in her heart, if she wants to copy, then so be it. Ever since she was a child, because of all kinds of weird ideas and small actions, she was punished by her master to copy a lot of things. However, there are rules in the prince's mansion. How many words can there be? Can she copy to death? Then, Ning Shu stared at the pile of books in front of her and was dumbfounded. Why didn't anyone tell her that there were over 500 rules in the Wang Fu? If he copied it 10 times, that would be more than 5,000 lines. He really knew how to copy the rhythm of a dead person. Xiahou Qing said unhurriedly, You should be glad that the Wang mansion in the capital is only used to enter the capital to meet the emperor. The rules here have been greatly reduced. If it were in Yunyang Prefecture, the number would be at least 3 times. Take your time. There's no need to rush. The gloating in his tone made Ning Shu's teeth itch with hatred. She angrily sat in front of the table and began to copy. Xiahou Qing was still sitting under the west window where he usually sat today. He listened as Ju Sai opened the book that recorded the background of everyone in the mansion and read it word by word. Ju Qin, 52 years old, in charge of gardening and weeding in the mansion. His family lives in Anji Square. His ancestral home is Izhou. 4 generations, he has been a farmer. He moved to the capital in the 5th year of the previous emperor Sheng Kang. His wife is weak and has never gone out to work. He only has 1 daughter. She is engaged to the Li family of Chang'an Lane soy sauce shop. The note appeared on the day of Shu. It was done and left the mansion. There is a guard, Li Zhong, as a witness. Zhong Youfu, 25 years old, in charge of the kitchen. His family lives in San Yuanli, his ancestral home. They had been working on this matter for many days since the note appeared. The other party was extremely careful and didn't leave any clues. Therefore, they could only start by investigating the background of the people in the prince's mansion, hoping to find some useful clues. Chapter 268. As Ning Shu monotonously copied, she wondered which of these people were suspicious. At the same time, she was doing 3 things at the same time. She stopped writing and rested her chin on her hand, thinking of ways to slack off. There were more than 5,000 lines here. If she accidentally missed 1,000 or so, it was reasonable. No matter how careful Xiahou Qing was, he shouldn't be able to detect it. Her heart itched with eagerness. But Xiahou Qing hadn't heard her mutter for a long time. It was as if he had ears in his heart and could easily hear her thoughts. Thus, he raised his hand to stop Juicy. He calmly said in Ning Shu's direction, "If you miss a word, double the penalty. If you miss 2 words, triple the penalty. Do as you see fit." With her little scheme exposed, Ning Shu immediately let out a miserable cry and lay down on the table. Xiahou Qing's lips faintly curved. He said to Juicy, "Continue." It was only the beginning of summer, but the sound of cicadas could already be heard. Today, it was particularly hot outside. Even sitting indoors, she couldn't help but feel a bit bored. Ning Shu silently copied for more than an hour. Her palms were already sweaty. She used a handkerchief to wipe the sweat off her palms. Sighing softly, she raised her head to look at Xiahou Qing. He still maintained his sitting posture, his hand gently kneading the bones of his palm as he listened to Juicy continue to read. Just like that, he didn't say a word. Sitting there, he was like a painting with the ability to calm one's heart. She watched for a while. After hearing Xiahou Qing praise Princess Changping as simple, straightforward, and without any subtlety, the irritation that had involuntarily risen in her heart finally dissipated. She lowered her head and continued to copy. Juicy said, "When Hui Niang, 49 years old. Responsible for cleaning the kitchen. Family lives in Wu Mai Fang, ancestral home in the capital. Originally opened an oil shop. After her husband died early, the shop was sold. Has 2 sons. The eldest, Qian Bingzhong, fell into the water when he was young. The second, Qian Bingyi, 25 years old. 9 years ago, he joined the Sichuan army as a soldier. 7 years ago, he was released to the family and is now an apprentice at the medicine hall in the western part of the city. Sun Nyan." Ju Sai was about to continue reading when Xiahou Qing's eyebrows twitched. He suddenly said, "Stop." Ning Shu stopped writing and looked up in surprise. "Is there something wrong with this person?" Xiahou Qing said, "Say it again." Juicy listened to his orders. Ning Shu listened carefully again, but still didn't understand. She said, "It sounds like there's no problem with a clean family background. Moreover, whether it's a business or a worker, it has nothing to do with old Princess Yu. Could it be her second son, Qian Bingyi? However, old Prince Yu was in charge of the Jiangnan army along the coast. He had no intersection with the Sichuan army guarding the desert in the northwest, one in the south and one in the north. How could it be her? Xiahou Qing said slowly, it's true that the Sichuan army has guarded the desert in the northwest for many years. At first glance, there's no connection. However, in the 17th year of Tianzi, His Majesty suddenly had a whim and listened to the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War's suggestion. He ordered the Sichuan army and the Jiangnan army to swap places. He wanted them to learn from each other's advantages in using troops to make up for their weaknesses. As a result, 30,000 soldiers of the Sichuan army were temporarily placed under old Prince Yu's command. However, Jiangnan has a lot of water, and the soldiers are mostly used to fighting on the water, which is mainly flexible. On the other hand, Sichuan is a vast desert, and the soldiers are used to fighting bravely. Tangerine was born in Huainan, but it didn't have any effect. Instead, it wasted the army's resources. As a result, this plan was hastily stopped after half a year. The book from that year is in the 6th row and 4th column from the right of the unknown hall. Go and see for yourself. Ning Shu put down her brush and immediately ran to the unknown hall to retrieve the book. She read it carefully without missing a single word. She found that what he said was indeed correct. Her feelings of admiration spontaneously rose. Your Highness was able to find clues from such vague words. Furthermore, you were able to remember old matters from many years ago. Ning Shu sincerely admires you. Xiahou Qing chuckled and said coldly, flattery won't make you write one less word. Put away your little thoughts. Go and bring this Wen Hui Niang to me. Her wishful thinking had failed once again. Ning Shu's face was covered in tears. She sighed and said, yes. She turned and left. Chapter 269. Reality proved that Xiahou Qing was indeed a master strategist. When Wen Hui Niang was brought to Chuanqing Pavilion, she initially wanted to feign ignorance, but under Xiahou Qing's coercion, she revealed a flaw. She knew that she couldn't hide it anymore, so she sat on the ground with an ashen face and confessed everything. She was indeed the one who left the note. Before old Princess Yu passed away, she found her and arranged for her to do this. The reason was that 9 years ago, her youngest son, Qian Bingyi, was conscripted into the Sichuan army. However, this child was timid and didn't have the ability to be a soldier. He was a 16-year-old boy, thin and slender, and didn't even have the strength to pick up a spear. However, he had a delicate and pretty face like a girl's. It was easy to imagine what kind of treatment he would receive in a military camp full of strong men who licked blood from blades and rarely saw women. He couldn't bear it and wanted to escape. However, Sichuan was more than 3,000 li away from the capital. Even if he escaped, he would probably die on the way. After nearly 2 years of humiliation, he gradually began to have thoughts of suicide. At this time, His Majesty suddenly ordered the soldiers from the north to the south. Thinking that Jiangnan was only a third of the distance from the capital, a flame of hope rose in his dead heart. From the time he went south, he had been trying to find an opportunity. It wasn't until the 2nd month after he came under old Prince Yu's command that the Wokou pirates attacked and Qian Bingyi's group was sent to fight them. After defeating the last group of Wokou pirates, he finally mustered up the courage to escape. Unfortunately, he was discovered and captured by his superior who had been bullying him. According to the laws of Great Yu, deserters were beheaded in public. When old Princess Yu heard about this from old Prince Yu's letter, she felt pity for him and felt that his actions were pardonable. Thus, she pleaded for mercy for him and allowed him to return home after 300 beatings, which could be considered to have saved his life. When Hui Niang's forehead hit the ground and she pleaded with tears in her eyes, this old servant knows that her crimes are unforgivable. However, this old servant has been a widow for more than 20 years. My eldest son also drowned and died early. This old servant has no choice but to repay old Princess Yu's kindness. Ju Sai frowned and said, then how did you prove that you were not present? Zhao Sanyang, who worked with you, clearly said that when she was cleaning outside, she saw you working in the kitchen. The candlelight reflected your shadow on the window. When Hui Niang convulsed and wailed, crying so hard that she couldn't speak. Ning Shu looked at the woman whose face was full of tears and white hair. She somewhat pitied her, but she really couldn't sympathize with her behavior. After thinking for a while, she guessed, I've seen the layout of the kitchen. In order to facilitate the placement of various ingredients and tools, there are several shelves on the west wall. As long as she stealthily moves one of them and hangs the clothes and other things she prepared in advance on the shelf, she can successfully make a camouflage. Then, she just needed to find a good opportunity to sneak out of the northern window when Zhao Sanyang wasn't paying attention. She would quickly put the note away and run back. If he was fast enough, it would take him less than half an incense stick's worth of time to go back and forth from the kitchen to here. It was entirely possible for him to quietly rush back before Zhao Sanyang noticed anything amiss. Moreover, Zhao Sanyang has been busy with her own matters. Why would she keep an eye on her from beginning to end? Xiahou Qing didn't speak for a long time. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. Then, he leisurely said, "Is that so?" These few words caused Wen Hui Niang to tremble in fear. She almost couldn't kneel anymore. Her voice trembled as she said, "Yes, this old servant's grandfather used to play shadow puppets. This old servant learned a little from my grandfather when I was young. When old Princess Yu heard about it, she gave me this idea. She had me make a shadow puppet that was similar to my human figure and hang it on the shelf in a bowing position. Then, it was almost like what Lord Imperial Bodyguard said." Chapter 270. Ning Shu smiled. "So it's a shadow puppet. That's a good idea. It's lighter and easier to hide than clothes. When you're done sneaking back, you can directly stuff the thin layer of shadow paper into the stove and burn it. That way, the evidence will all disappear without a trace. If it wasn't for the fact that His Highness found some clues through the words Sichuan army, you would have been fooled. I didn't think that there would be a talent like you in my residence. I've underestimated you. It's a waste of talent to only let you clean up in the kitchen." Xiahou Qing let out a cold laugh. Ning Shu seemed to have received his order. She walked in front of Wen Hui Niang and said with a cold face, "Then, other than asking you to do this, how much do you know about the contents of the note? If you still dare to hide it, it won't be as simple as being chased out of the residence." She reached out her hand and placed it on the dagger at her waist. Wen Hui Niang desperately shook her head and raised 3 fingers to the sky. "This old servant dares to swear on the life of my only son that old princess you only asked me to do this and didn't tell me anything else. As for what was written on the note, this old servant has been scared witless every day after receiving it. I only want to finish my task and repay the favor. I don't even dare to look at a single word. I beg your highness to forgive this old servant. Please don't chase this old servant out of the residence. Otherwise, if people hear that I was chased out of the residence, who would be willing to use me? My adopted son's job in the medicine hall will also be ruined. If that's the case, the 2 of us will have no way to survive. I beg your highness to have mercy. I beg your highness to have mercy." Wen Hui Niang's forehead hit the ground and she was so scared that she curled up like a quail. Looking at her appearance, it didn't seem like she had the complete trust of old Princess Yu. Ning Shu walked behind Xiahou Qing and wrote the word Wu on his back. Wen Hui Niang was still kowtowing and swearing, begging Xiahou Qing to give her another chance. In the future, she would definitely remember his grace and be loyal to His Highness. Ning Shu sighed slightly and slowly shook her head. In this world, everyone has their own suffering. Even among the prisoners in the Ministry of Justice's prison, more than half of them have their own reasons for committing crimes. Since you've stepped into the Nanping Manor to take on a task and hold the manor's rice bowl, then the Crown Prince is your only master. Today, you can betray your master to repay a debt of gratitude. But tomorrow, you can't guarantee that your son won't be kidnapped and you won't harm the heir again. Your feelings this time are pitiful and your intentions are punishable. There is no way you can stay in the Wang mansion any longer. Wen Hui Niang, you should leave on your own." Xiahou Qing didn't say a word. He just lifted his chin slightly. His personal guard had already walked over with his sword. Seeing that there was no hope, Wen Hui Niang cried in despair. She kowtowed to Xiahou Qing, got up, and staggered away. After Wen Hui Niang's figure disappeared, Ning Shu leaned over and whispered in his ear, "Your Highness, the bait has already left." Xiahou Qing nodded and opened his mouth. "Juicy, Send someone to follow her in case she is hiding something and meets up with someone. At the same time, keep an eye on whether or not anyone has made a move against her. If there is, make sure to leave them alive. The two of them didn't discuss anything in advance. They had already finished acting out the entire play and planned the next steps. It was as if their minds were connected. Juicy was stunned. His usually expressionless face also revealed an expression of surprise. He bowed and said, "This subordinate understands." After Juicy left to arrange for people to do things, Ning Shu exhaled and sat down. She picked up a cup of tea and gulped it down. Using her hand as a fan, she shook it and said with a wry smile, "It wasn't easy to find the person who put the note, but we didn't get much new information. I hope that after this bait is released, it will attract a big fish for us." Xiahou Qing lightly brushed his dust-free clothes embroidered with auspicious beast patterns. He stood and said, "Nanping Wang Mansion's personal guard personally chased out a woman who was washing in the kitchen. Such a big scene, how could it not attract the attention of some people? Don't worry, what will come will come. Before this, it will be almost time for dinner." Ning Shu hurried to catch up, still thinking about that matter. She said, "I hope so." Sensing Ning Shu's footsteps, Xiahou Qing tilted his head slightly and said, "This prince is talking about my dinner time. It has nothing to do with you. Before you finish copying the rules, you are not allowed to take a single step out of Spring Awakening Pavilion." Ning Shu froze. She watched Xiahou Qing's figure disappear into the distance. She stomped her feet in frustration. Then she dejectedly sat back down in front of the table where she was copying. She looked at the thick stack of paper in front of her and lost interest in life. Chapter 271. Xiahou Qing was serious. He said that if she didn't finish copying, she wouldn't be allowed to step out of the door. Fortunately, there was still a plate of desserts left in Chuanqing Pavilion, enough for her to fill her stomach. However, the amount was too large. Even if she copied for 3 days, she might not be able to finish copying. Ning Shu stared blankly at the sunset outside the window. The sky was intoxicated, and the Milky Way was filled with stars. Outside the pavilion, the clear croaking of frogs could be heard. She copied until late into the night. Lying on the table, she fell asleep. Ju Sai supported Xiahou Qing as they stood outside the window. In a low voice, he said, "Heir apparent, you trapped Miss Ning here to copy. Is it because you don't want her to be involved in this matter?" In the night wind, half of Xiahou Qing's black hair was tied up. The other half, along with his black robes, fluttered in the wind. His voice was like the fluttering of his robes, so light that not a trace of it could be found. Right now, she should still be in prison, reflecting on her mistakes. She shouldn't be outside. If she gets too involved in this matter, once her identity is exposed, her punishment won't be as simple as 20 beatings a day. It's very likely that she won't even be able to keep her life. Separated by a window, Xiahou Qing stood quietly without saying anything. He only maintained a slightly sideways posture. It was as if he was listening to the clear summer night wind blowing for 10,000 li. It was as if he was listening to the witty croaking of the frogs at his feet. It was also as if he was listening to her shallow and even breathing. After a moment, he said, "Fang Mima, I'll have to trouble you to find that thing on her body." Fang Mima received the order and walked in as lightly as the wind. Feeling around Ning Shu's body, she found something and walked out. "Your Highness, is it this wooden box?" This morning, she had been running back and forth in a hurry. Sure enough, she had hidden this thing on her body. Xiahou Qing said, "Take out the thing inside and burn it." Juicy was startled. "Your Highness, this is the only clue we have. If we burn it, even if Princess Changping really does discover something, it will be very difficult for us to gain her trust." Under the starlight, Xiahou Qing's pale face didn't show the slightest bit of hesitation. As long as this note exists, she'll still think of ways to get close to Princess Changping. At the same time, she'll expose herself to countless pairs of eyes and be drawn into a dangerous vortex. It's better to completely cut off her thoughts. As for Changping, I'll think of something else. Xiahou Qing ordered again, "Burn it." Juicy had no choice but to obey. He opened the fire and blew on it gently. The flame immediately devoured the note that contained the secret of the plum blossom kiss, leaving only a bit of dust that was blown away by the wind. Hearing Xiahou Qing's suppressed cough, Juicy said, "Your Highness, the things have been burned. This subordinate will help you back to rest." Xiahou Qing waved his hand to indicate that there was no harm. Then, he thought of something and asked Fang Mama, "Is she wearing something?" "No, Miss Ning fell asleep in the middle of copying. She didn't wear anything. I remember that there's a velvet blanket on the soft couch in the inner room. Go get it for me." Xiahou Qing indicated for Juicy to help him into the pavilion. He walked to the sleeping Ning Shu's side, took the blanket, and bent down to drape it over her. Ning Shu was still in a deep sleep. She murmured a few words, then turned her face to the side and fell back into a deep sleep. "Let's go." Xiahou Qing stood by her side for a while, quietly tracing her figure in the pitch-black darkness. Then, he turned and left. When their footsteps disappeared into the distance, Ning Shu, who had been sleeping all this time, slowly opened her clear eyes. She looked at the flickering lights on the table and silently pulled the blanket tightly around her body, completely wrapping it around her. After a moment, she closed her eyes again. The next morning. "Where is she?" Xiahou Qing's face was as cold as ice. The guard Hu Ju knelt on one knee, his face pale, reporting to Your Highness, subordinate sent her out of the residence. "Didn't you hear what this prince ordered yesterday?" Hu Ju's other knee also knelt on the ground, but Imperial Bodyguard Ning had Your Highness official seal. She said that she had received Your Highness official seal and had urgently left the residence to do something for Your Highness. This subordinate was also hesitant, but Imperial Bodyguard Ning also said that Your Highness kept the official seal close to your body. If it wasn't given by Your Highness, how could she have the ability to steal it? She also said that the matter was urgent and couldn't be delayed. Otherwise, no one would be able to bear the consequences. While this subordinate was hesitating, she had already run out. This subordinate is slow-witted. Your Highness, please punish this subordinate. Xiahou Qing frowned. He reached out and touched the official seal on his waist. Sure enough, it wasn't there. He thought back and realized that she must have stolen it when he was covering her with the blanket last night. She hadn't fallen asleep at that time and had pretended to fool his ears. This woman. Chapter 272. Today, Chasing Cloud and Chasing Moon Tavern was exceptionally quiet. The entire tavern was closed and only received Xiao Zhongping. It could be counted as Xiao Minglan's last gift to her niece who was about to be married off. A palace maid guarding outside the tavern walked up the stairs to the railing on the second floor facing the river. She reported, "Your Highness, there is a person who claims to be a guard of Nanping Wang Fu. He is asking for an audience." Xiao Zhongping quietly stared at the other side of the river in a daze. Hearing this, she casually waved her hand, "Let him come up." After waiting for 2 whole days on Xuanwu Street, which was closest to the palace gate, the princess finally left the palace. Thus, Ning Shu, who had followed her all the way here, did not have time to wipe the sweat off her face. She hurried upstairs and finally saw Xiao Zhongping. "It's you. Get up." Xiao Zhongping glanced at her and continued to lean against the railing to look at the bustling water market on the other side of the river. In the water market, the vendors along the river were guarding their baskets filled with fresh flowers, vegetables, oil tea, silk, and soft tofu. They smiled and waved at the men and women coming and going, while guarding the copper coin pouches at their waists. Xiao Zhongping stared in a daze and said as if sighing, "There are only 10 days left." Ning Shu was stunned for a moment and then understood. She was talking about the marriage that was less than 10 days away. 10 days later, she would be forced to wear the red wedding dress that symbolized the good relationship between the two countries and board the Luan sedan. She would never be able to return to this place until she died. Looking at Xiao Zhongping's lonely back, Ning Shu could not help but feel pity for this girl who was of the noblest birth in the Great Yu dynasty, but the most unhappy. She knew that she should say something to comfort her. But in this situation, no matter what she said, it would be easy. After all, no one had the right to sympathize with something that did not happen to them. She pondered for a moment and could only say, Your Highness, this trip is like the Jiaojun going out to the frontier. You are sacrificing yourself for the country and the people. The people will be grateful for your Highness' righteousness and will remember it in their hearts. Xiao Zhongping laughed bleakly. The Jiaojun is respectable but not easy to be. If I could, I really wanted to be the daughter of an ordinary family in the marketplace, just like those women on the other side of the river, selling cloth, flowers, oil tea. I was willing to sell anything. As long as she brought home a few copper coins after a busy day, she would receive a greeting from her parents, brothers, sisters, and husband. You've worked hard. Sit down and rest. I've specially left a bowl of herbal tea for you. It's a pity that I can only dream about this for the rest of my life. After she finished speaking, a female official standing guard not far away immediately coughed as a warning. Xiao Zhongping sneered. She swept her gaze over the dozens of pairs of eyes that were staring at her. She berated, all of you, get lost. I don't want to see you on this floor. Don't try to scare me with Imperial Father's tricks. If you provoke me, I might just fall into this Chaobai River. The guards and maids were all shocked, but they knew that according to the temperament of the 13th princess, she might really do it, so they had to retreat further and further. After waiting for the guards to retreat, Xiao Zhongping said to Ning Shu, "You came to find me to ask about the previous matter, right?" Ning Shu was deeply apologetic. "Yes. I shouldn't have disturbed your Highness at this time, but the matter is urgent. Right now, our only hope is on your Highness. Please forgive me." Xiao Zhongping waved her hand and said, "After you told me that day, I carefully looked through everything and indeed found something that might be what you are looking for. However, I won't give it to you unless you give me a reason. Why do you want this item? What is the plum blossom kiss you mentioned that day? What does this have to do with old Princess Yu and the heir?" Xiao Zhongping's tone was cold and her words were sharp. It was as if she was a completely different person. However, Ning Shu wasn't surprised. After losing her last pillar of support and facing the fate of being sent to another country as a chess piece by her imperial father, even the most simple-minded person would be forced to grow up. However, this was related to Xiahou Qing's secret, so she couldn't reveal it to another person. Ning Shu clenched her fists tightly. After a while, she bowed deeply and apologized. "Your Highness, please forgive me. That day, I lied to your Highness. Actually, this item has nothing to do with the heir. In fact, it is closely related to me. My life and the survival of my family are all implicated by this poison called the plum blossom kiss." Xiao Zhongping looked at her from head to toe. "You?" Her heart was filled with doubt. She really couldn't understand how a lowly guard could be related to old Princess Yu. She sneered, "Ha! Don't lie. Otherwise, I will immediately call people to drag you to the Supreme Court for a heavy punishment." Xiao Zhongping raised her hand and was about to call the guards downstairs. Ning Shu's back was drenched in cold sweat on such a hot day. She hurriedly interrupted her and had no choice but to grit her teeth and whisper, "I'm not lying, because my real identity is not a guard of the Nanping Mansion, but Ning Shu of the Duke Ning Mansion." Xiao Zhongping suddenly widened her eyes and stood up. "You deserve to die." Chapter 273. After a short moment of shock, Xiao Zhongping calmed down. He leaned over and deliberately threatened, "Why are you here? This is the crime of deceiving the monarch. Aren't you afraid that I will immediately call for people to escort you to Imperial Father and sentence you to be beheaded?" Her identity had been exposed. Ning Shu had nothing to be afraid of. She smiled slightly and said, "Because I know that although your Highness is known for being flamboyant, your heart is actually very soft. Because you have experienced pain that many people have never experienced, you always have a compassionate heart. Just like the palace servants around you, you could obviously beat and scold them, but you never did. Even if you didn't get along with fourth young Miss Qi before, when she was almost stung by a poisonous bee next to the Imperial Garden's supreme liquid pool, you didn't think of the previous grudge at all and instead saved her. This is something that Ning Shu can't compare to. Therefore, Ning Shu believes that even if I tell your Highness my identity, your Highness won't have the heart to kill Ning Shu." Xiao Zhongping raised his eyebrows. "How do you know about the supreme liquid pool?" Ning Shu rubbed the tip of her nose embarrassedly. On the day of the incident, the little eunuch who visited your highness' palace was also me. You are simply. Xiao Zhongping was dumbfounded. After a moment, he sighed, forget it. You helped me with that case. The people all say that my temperament is overbearing and presumptuous, but in fact, the most presumptuous one is you. You dare to pretend to be anyone and do anything. If I had your courage, perhaps Imperial Father wouldn't push the matter of the political marriage to me. Ningxu said, Your Highness is pure and kind, and you don't want to implicate others, so you didn't refuse. Xiao Zhongping glanced at her and snorted, No matter how sweet your mouth is, you must answer my questions one by one. If you don't answer one question, I won't tell you what that thing is. Who would have thought that the pure little princess who was willing to trust the truth with a few words would turn into a little fox in the blink of an eye? Ningxu sighed in her heart and could only say, Ningxu doesn't dare to hide anything. First of all, the plum blossom kiss is extremely poisonous. Your Highness should know that I have been engaged to 3 different husbands. Xiao Zhongping nodded. That kind of unprecedented matter, there's probably no one in the capital who doesn't know about it. Ningxu was speechless at her straightforward praise. She could only shed a tear of sympathy for herself and then continued, My first husband, young General Song, died on the battlefield. His body was not found, so I won't tell you for now. Her second husband was the 3rd son of the Qi family, Qi Huijin, who died of a sudden illness before their wedding. Her third husband, Cloud Leaf, also met with misfortune a few days ago. He was almost poisoned to death by Yu Zhao, a brothel girl who pretended to be consort Wen. Outsiders did not know the details, but in reality, they were all poisoned by the same poison called plum blossom kiss. That's why I said that this poison was actually closely related to me. Although it wasn't used on me, anyone who was related to me could be harmed by it. Even my family was prophesied when I was 10 years old that they would all be cursed to death by me. This is the origin of the story of me being a jinx to the heavens, cursing the entire family. Xiao Zhongping was shocked when she heard this. She thought for a while and said, Then what does this poison have to do with old Princess Yu? Ningxu paused for a moment. Then she walked in front of Xiao Zhongping and stretched out her hand. Stroke by stroke, she wrote 2 words, Consort Qi. Princess probably doesn't know that the strange poison in her body is actually the same kind. Ningxu looked deeply into Xiao Zhongping's eyes. Her voice was even softer than the wind, but it caused Xiao Zhongping's expression to immediately change. After learning this kind of unspeakable secret, Xiao Zhongping tightly gripped her dress and walked back and forth in front of the railing. Her heart was in a mess. She wasn't stupid. After thinking carefully, she could understand the meaning of Ningxu's words. Consort Qi, plum blossom kiss, old Princess Yu. There was no need to say much about the meaning behind these words. It made her so nervous that her palms were sweating. She walked back and forth for a long time. Suddenly, she thought of something and stopped. She turned around and looked at Ningxu with a piercing gaze. That day at Shenqing Temple, the person who solved the case, was it you? Chapter 274. She didn't expect Xiao Zhongping to be so sharp and have already guessed the gist of the matter. Facing Xiao Zhongping's piercing gaze, Ningxu fell silent. It's me. Xiao Zhongping's face turned pale. Then, the person who caused old consort Yu's death is also you. When she told Xiao Zhongping those words, Ningxu had already mentally prepared herself. But when faced with such hatred, as if she was staring at an enemy, Ningxu still felt stifled. No matter how righteous her reasons were, she couldn't deny that if she hadn't exposed old consort Yu that day, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Furthermore, to Xiao Zhongping, who was in a huge rage, every word of her explanation was just sophistry. Thus, she could only lower her eyes slightly and accept Xiao Zhongping's monstrous hatred. Immersed in intense sorrow, Xiao Zhongping clenched her fists tightly and rushed in front of Ningxu, questioning, Do you know? Do you know that she is the only person who loves me the most in the world? You solved the case and cleared my name, but you also caused the death of the most important person to me. Xiao Zhongping cursed as tears streamed down her face. I'd rather be suspected by others. I'd rather my mother's death never be avenged. I also hope that she can live. You murderer. Murderer. Ning Shu took out the handkerchief and handed it over. She slapped it away forcefully and it fell into the wind. In the end, it fell into the endless waves of the Chaobai River Tenjong below. Under the dazzling sunlight, the splashing white waves were as fine as silver. On the other side of the river, the market was still bustling with people. A passionate flower seller inserted a blooming jasmine flower into the hair of a child, causing a string of bell-like laughter. On the chasing cloud-chasing moon-chasing tower, Xiao Zhongping and Ning Shu were speechless. Old consort Yu's death is indeed related to me. It doesn't matter if your highness scolds me or punishes me. Ning Shu will accept it without any objections. I only beg you to let me take a look at that item. Ning Shu thanks you. Ning Shu took a deep breath and bowed deeply again. Xiao Zhongping had one hand on the railing as he used his sleeve to wipe away his tears. His eyes were red as he stared at her. You're still lying to me. Even if you knew that the poison was related to old Princess Consort Yu, how did you know that she gave me that important item? Also, when you came to find me that day, you repeatedly emphasized that this item is very, very important to the Crown Prince. You didn't look like you were faking it. Xiao Zhongping gritted his teeth and said word by word, Ning Shu, if you still refuse to tell me the whole truth, I will make that thing disappear from this world. I, Xiao Zhongping, will keep my word this time. Her decisiveness had forced Ning Shu into a dead end. Ning Shu looked at the tears in Xiao Zhongping's eyes and muttered to herself for a long time. She then took out the note from her sleeve and handed it to Xiao Zhongping. Previously, she guessed that Xiahou Qing didn't want her to meddle in this matter, so she made a copy of the note and put it in the wooden box in advance. The real one was hidden by her and was still in her hands. Now that things had developed to this point, there was no way to hide it anymore. Looking at the familiar handwriting on the note, Xiao Zhongping's chest heaved violently. Looking at the content, Xiao Zhongping's fingers trembled as she folded the note. So it's like this. Xiao Zhongping sneered with her back facing Ning Shu, then let Xiahou Shizi marry me. When the time comes, I will naturally give the item to him. That way, I can also escape the fate of a political marriage. Ning Shu suddenly raised her head and bit her lip hard. Ning Shu will try her best to fulfill any request the princess has. However, forgive Ning Shu for not being able to agree to this matter. You don't want to give up anything and just want to take this item from me? Based on what? Don't tell me you're dreaming. Xiao Zhongping waved his sleeves and flipped the teacup on the table to the ground. The broken pieces of porcelain flew up and left a cut on Ning Shu's cheek. She subconsciously reached out and wiped it. It was blood. Xiao Zhongping turned her head and stared at her with gritted teeth. She suddenly thought of something and laughed. She said with a malicious expression, You just said that you will try your best to fulfill any request I have. Good, then I will give you a chance. Kneel down and beg me. Kneel in front of me and kowtow to me 10 times. Ning Shu, are you willing or not? Chapter 275. If the princess is satisfied, Ning Shu will not refuse. Ning Shu said without hesitation. Xiao Zhongping stared at her in shock and subconsciously took a step back. She had made this rude request with the intention of humiliating her and embarrassing her. But she did not expect that Ning Shu would bend her knees without hesitation. One knee was on the ground, followed by the other knee, and then both knees were together. Her forehead was on the ground as she kowtowed for the first time. Looking at Ning Shu's determined face with blood on her face, Xiao Zhongping's heart began to beat violently. The second kowtow sounded, followed by the third. Xiao Zhongping rushed forward and pushed Ning Shu down. You. Stop kowtowing, get up. She looked at Ning Shu in disbelief and asked, Where is your self-esteem, where is your pride? Thinking back to when you expressed goodwill to my 6th imperial brother on the street, you did not fake it. Why are you so cowardly now? The wound on Ning Shu's cheek was still oozing blood droplets. Bit by bit, they condensed into a red bean and rolled down to her lips, dyeing her slightly pale lips red. She pursed the smell of rust from the corner of her lips, not minding it. His Highness the Crown Prince hates being threatened the most. He once said to me, No one in this world can threaten me, not even my life. So, even if old princess you left this note, even if I know that his hopes are tied to you, I cannot force him to do something he does not want to do. But kowtowing 10 times is as easy as flipping my hand for me. As for self-esteem and pride, I have them, but they are not harmful to each other, so it is not impossible to give them up. I only hope that they can alleviate the princess's grief and anger. Xiao Zhongping looked at her with a strange expression and said hesitantly, "Could it be that you actually—" Ning Shu's thick eyelashes fluttered a few times, but she did not say a word. Xiao Zhongping, who was also in love with Xiahou Qing, was not in the mood to help Ning Shu expose the layer of paper in her heart. She looked at Ning Shu in annoyance and then looked at the bustling river bank, as if she was recalling her beautiful dream. Xiao Zhongping, who had been in grief and anger all along, finally slowly calmed down. She sneered mischievously and said, "To tell you the truth, before you came to me, Xiahou had already come to me. He told me that as long as I took it out, he would agree to help me solve the marriage problem. But he didn't want to tell me the ins and outs of the matter, so I didn't immediately agree. I only told him to think about it." Ning Shu, who had been hunting geese for years, had never expected to be pecked by geese. She had always fooled others, but there was also a day when she was fooled by others. Ning Shu couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. He brushed the dust off his body and walked to Xiao Zhongping's side. "Princess is witty, Ning Shu is sincerely convinced." Xiao Zhongping looked at him and wanted to say, "You're just confused because you're too concerned." She was about to say it, but she swallowed it back. Old Princess Yu's death was still a knot in her heart that was difficult to untie. She didn't want to be close to Ning Shu like a friend. "You win, Ning Shu. What I wanted to know is now clear, and half of the anger in my heart has dissipated. Since Xiahou is willing to help me solve my problem, then I don't have any doubts or hesitation. I'll give you that thing." She maintained a cold tone and took out a set of sleeping clothes from the box she carried with her. "This is the sleeping clothes that old princess you prepared for me in advance. After her accident, her nanny gave it to me. At that time, I was so sad that I didn't have the heart to look at it. After you came to find me last time, I carefully looked through it and found that this set of sleeping clothes was embroidered with the plum blossom pattern you were looking for. As for the mystery behind it, that's your own business. It has nothing to do with me." Ning Shu took the nightgown and carefully put it away. She understood in her heart, no wonder there's the phrase "you can get it." Other than the newlywed husband, who can get a girl's nightgown? Old Princess Yu's treatment of Princess Changping could be described as deep affection. Princess Changping's words were emotionless, but Ning Shu's eyes were sharp. She could clearly sense the reluctance in her expression. She thought for a moment and said, "Princess, please don't worry. When the mystery is solved, I'll definitely return it to Princess in one piece." Xiao Zhongping rolled her eyes and got up to leave. "Who wants your fake kindness?" Looking at this arrogant little princess who didn't act according to common sense, Ning Shu couldn't help but laugh. "Your Highness, saying one thing and thinking another is a trick that only little children like to play." Xiao Zhongping's face turned red. She glared at Ji Yunshu with shame and indignation. She turned to the group of guards and female officials standing guard downstairs and said, "What are you all in a daze for? Return to the palace." Chapter 276. Seeing that Xiao Zhongping was about to leave, Ning Shu suddenly thought of something and took a few steps forward to ask, "Oh right, Your Highness, you told me before that old princess you sang a nursery rhyme to you the night before the incident. May I ask what it was? Can you tell me?" Xiao Zhongping said with a calm expression, "It's the one that many people sing to coax their children, about the swallow pecking the imperial grandson." Finally getting an important clue, Ning Shu let out a long sigh and tiredly patted her sore limbs. In order to keep an eye on Xiao Zhongping and avoid Xiahou Qing at the same time, she had been hiding here and there for the past 2 days. She was really in a difficult situation. But fortunately, it was finally done. She had to have a good sleep first. As for how to face Xiahou Qing, and when to face him, whatever, she would think about it after she had enough sleep. After all, lice wouldn't itch, and debts wouldn't weigh her down. She was in a good mood and slowly walked down the stairs. While thinking about Witchin had a good reputation and the food wasn't bad, She stepped out of Chasing Clouds and Chasing Moon restaurant. Then, when she saw the familiar carriage that had just arrived, her footsteps suddenly stopped. The carriage stopped, and a tall and cold figure stepped out. It was as if the figure was painted with black and white ink. When he appeared, the people on the other side of the river all looked over. The flower girl also stopped her business and excitedly and curiously tiptoed, following the crowd. Xiao Zhangping's sedan was just about to leave when she saw Xiahou Qing. She hurriedly ordered the guards to stop and jumped down from the sedan to walk over. Her face was filled with the loveliness and expectation of a jasmine. Xiahou Qing also patiently listened to Xiao Zhongping seriously, occasionally giving a short reply. The distance was a little far, so Ning Xu couldn't hear what the two of them were talking about. She only saw Xiao Zhongping raise her head to look at Xiahou Qing with eyes that were abnormally bright, like stars. Xiahou Qing's expression was also calm and gentle, like a green tree in the early summer, casting a shadow that gradually faded. The gaps in the shadow were sprinkled with bits of gold. Ning Xu thought for a moment and immediately turned to leave silently along the wall. Then, she heard Xiahou Qing suddenly raise his voice, "Stop, where do you think you're going?" Ning Xu felt a chill run down her back. She lowered her head and wanted to play dumb to escape, but there was already a wall of people standing in front of her, easily blocking her path. On the other side, Xiahou Qing lowered his head and said a few words to Xiao Zhongping. Xiao Zhongping to go back to the palace. After Xiao Zhongping left, Xiahou Qing's footsteps were slow and leisurely, gradually approaching Ning Xu from behind. Each step was very light, but it was as if he was stepping on her heart, causing her to tremble with fear until he was right behind her. A cool breath brushed against her ear, and he sneered, "Ning Xu, you've only been by my side for a few days, and your courage and insight have grown. You've made me have a whole new level of respect for you. Deceiving your master, stealing the seal and running away, and getting close to the princess behind my back. Do you still remember what the punishment for these crimes is according to the rules of the manor?" Sun Wukong was destined to be unable to escape from the palm of the Buddha. Ning Xu had no way to escape. She could only brace herself and turn around. Embarrassed, she said, "I remember." Xiahou Qing's brows furrowed, and his face was filled with suppressed anger. "You still dare to do it even if you remember. You're simply, these past 2 days, he had sent out all of his personal guards to find her. If he hadn't guessed that she would be following Xiao Zhongping when he left the palace today, he was afraid that he wouldn't have been able to catch this slippery fish." Ning Xu turned her head away and said in a small voice, "What your highness wants to do, you didn't discuss it with me in advance. Didn't he also try to burn the note behind her back and trap her in the fu to copy books and not leave the house? We're the same." Chapter 277. She recalled the scene she had just seen. He had lowered his head slightly and patiently chatted with Xiao Zhongping. His expression had been so gentle. How could he be so vicious when it came to her? Inexplicably, her teeth felt as sour as if she had bitten into a plum that ripened early in summer. Ning Xu smacked her teeth and felt a little upset. She didn't admit her mistake and instead began to quibble. Xiahou Qing was so angry that he laughed. "It seems that you remembered the rules I told you to copy, but you didn't remember any of them in your heart. Juicy, take her back and copy them all again." She had copied so hard and only copied a third of the rules. If she had to tear them up and copy them again, she would die. "I know I was wrong," Ning Xu immediately shouted and regretted her actions. "Heir apparent was worried about my safety and made plans for me, but I didn't appreciate it. This is the first mistake. I fell asleep on the table at night. Heir apparent was kind enough to cover me with a blanket, but I stole the official seal when you weren't paying attention. This is the second mistake. Heir apparent didn't want me to interfere, but I deliberately did the opposite. This is the third mistake. Your Highness reprimanded me because of your deep love for me. However, I was impudent and talked back. This is my fourth mistake. In short, this subordinate has made a grave mistake. I ask your Highness to consider that this is my first offense and forgive this subordinate." Her words were sincere, and her expression and tone were all on point. She was as soft as a pampered sparrow in his residence that accidentally pecked him when it flew over to eat. Then, she purposely used her soft little head to gently rub his palm as an apology. He clearly knew that it was purposely showing off, but he couldn't bear to blame it. However, this was Ning Shu. She was 10,000 times more cunning than that sparrow. There were so many twists and turns in her heart that she could calculate everyone in the capital. Xiahou Qing continued to wear a cold face and ignored her. With Juice's help, he turned and boarded the carriage. Ning Shu smiled bitterly as she looked at his back. What should she do? She could only follow. After helping Xiahou Qing into the carriage, Juicy reported in a low voice, "Heir apparent, Miss Ning's face is injured." Xiahou Qing's sharp words were directed at Ning Shu. What's going on? Ning Shu braced herself, lifted the curtain, and boarded the carriage. She sat across from Xiahou Qing and said indifferently, "Oh, this. I was accidentally scratched by a tree branch. It's just a small wound, and the blood has stopped flowing." Xiahou Qing was extremely sharp. Was it done by the 13th princess? Ning Shu wanted to continue to laugh and brush him off, but Juicy said, "The wound is slanted upward, from deep to shallow, and the wound is smooth. If it was scraped by a rough branch, it wouldn't be like this. It would look like it was cut by a knife or broken porcelain." After he finished speaking, he expressionlessly retreated under Ning Shu's murderous gaze. He sat in the driver's seat and drove the carriage back to the palace. TSK, were all the people around Xiahou Qing freaks? Wasn't it said that Juice's specialty was strategy? How could his eyes be so sharp? Ning Shu could only admit, after Her Highness found out that old consort Yu's death was related to me, she broke the cup in a moment of grief and anger. A small piece of porcelain flew out and accidentally brushed my face. She didn't do it on purpose. Other than this, did she make things difficult for you? Ning Shu didn't even think about it. No. Xiahou Qing raised his eyebrows suspiciously. You answered so quickly. You're lying. Moreover, with the 13th princess's temperament, once she gets angry, it won't be easy for her to calm down. Ning Shu, if you're lying to me, do you believe that I'll teach you a lesson that you won't forget for the rest of your life? I really didn't. The princess was very angry and said some things to me. However, she also knew that if she wanted to avoid the marriage, she still had to ask Heir Apparent for help. Therefore, she only made things difficult for me verbally and nothing else. I swear to the heavens. Ning Shu was obviously taking advantage of Xiahou Qing's blindness. She put up 4 fingers and said, 4. She wasn't a saint who wanted to cover for Xiao Zhongping or anything. However, she just didn't want to tell him what happened just now. She didn't want him to know that she was embarrassed. She didn't want him to know her embarrassing side. She also didn't want him to have any contempt or sympathy for her because of this. She also didn't want him to apologize. She hoped that in front of him, she would always be the bold and fearless Ning Shu who was always in her best state. Seeing that Xiahou Qing didn't ask any more questions, she gently exhaled, thinking that she had passed this stage. She didn't expect that when she was about to put down her hand, Xiahou Qing suddenly reached out and grabbed it. Chapter 278. However, his eyes were blurry after all, so he couldn't hold her hand properly. He only managed to grab her wrist. In that instant, Ning Shu's breathing became chaotic. The place he was holding was burning hot, and it flowed along her blood vessels to her heart. She sensed that Xiahou Qing's slightly cold palm was quickly moving in the direction of her finger. Ning Shu hurriedly came back to her senses and withdrew her 4th finger. After confirming that she was indeed making a vow, Xiahou Qing dispelled his suspicions about her. However, there was a sudden silence in the carriage. It was as if time had been frozen at this moment, falling into some kind of obscure state. No one moved, no one spoke. Only the sound of each person's breathing intertwined with each other. Until Xiahou Qing suddenly reacted. He let go of her hand and said to Ju Siling, who was outside the carriage curtain, "Go to the medical center." Ning Shu also came back to her senses and said, "It's really just a very small wound. There's really no need to make such a big fuss. Perhaps it will heal before we reach the medical center." Other patients will definitely laugh at me if they see it. Shut up. Xiahou Qing directly threw these 2 words at her, successfully sealing her mouth. Ning Shu looked at him sullenly, then turned her gaze to outside the carriage window. The carriage left the chasing cloud and chasing moon building and slowly drove along the Chaobai River in the direction of the medical center. Along the way, the cheerful sound of the Chaobai River flowed side by side. She quietly pinched the fingertips that he had just counted one by one. Suddenly, she felt that the weather outside wasn't very hot. There was also a small gust of cool wind entering the carriage window. She couldn't help but curl the corners of her mouth into a shallow arc. The early summer plum ripened early. The first bite was indescribably sour, but after tasting it, even though you knew it was sour, you still couldn't help but want to take a second bite. Because after the sourness, there was always a long sweet aftertaste. It was too wonderful for words. After a cool breeze, Ning Shu gently opened her mouth. Her voice was as soft as the most delicate pattern embroidered by an embroiderer in shoe embroidery. Next time something similar happens, I won't act rashly. I'll definitely discuss it with Your Highness in advance and make the most careful plans. However, I also hope that Your Highness can be honest with me. This way, we won't have any misunderstandings and won't waste so much effort and time. Xiahou Qing's expression seemed to change slightly, like a wisp of cloud flying across the vast sky, light and soft to the point of almost being transparent. He slowly said, "Okay." Ning Shu lowered her eyes and smiled silently. Then she said, "That's right, I took that thing from the princess. It's a sleeping gown embroidered with plum blossoms." Xiahou Qing's carriage was naturally one of the safest places in the world. After spending so much effort to obtain this sleeping gown, she finally had the time to take it out and examine it carefully. She saw that on the snow-white satin that was as soft as a young girl's skin, there were over 100 red plum blossoms that looked exactly the same. It should have been the most festive color, but with this kind of dense pile of plum blossoms and the special meaning of this design, looking at it from afar, it gave off the feeling of looking at a blood rain. Ning Shu's eyes carefully passed over each plum blossom, not wanting to miss a single one. Suddenly, she stopped on one of them and lowered her head to smell it. On this plum blossom, I seem to smell a bit of rust. She moved the plum blossom to a window where the light was better and found that the embroidery on this plum blossom was darker than the others. It was faintly black, like it was mixed with blood. Chapter 279. After sniffing and inspecting it carefully, Ning Shu confirmed that the plum blossom was embroidered with threads dyed with blood. A blood-stained plum blossom. What does old consort you want to tell us through it? Putting down the nightgown in her hands, Ning Shu fell into deep thought. Every scene related to old consort you flashed through her mind like a book. She suddenly said, "I remember, when I examined old consort Yu's body, I found a wound on her right index finger. It seemed like she bit it herself. Could it be related to this? But what does this drop of blood have to do with the kiss of the plum blossom? Or is there something else mixed in this drop of blood that I can't identify? If only Hui Mo was here, he might be able to find a way to test it." Ning Shu missed Hui Mo's use very much. Seeming a little tired, Xiahou Qing leaned against the cushion and said casually, "The Ministry of Justice has sent a message that the palace has stopped the punishment of 20 strokes of the cane a day. I believe that you will be released soon." "That's great, we're finally going to pass this trial." Hearing this, Ning Shu let out a long sigh of relief. She thought to herself, "Hui Mo suffered for me this time. When he comes back, I must make it up to him twice as much." In the Ministry of Justice's prison, Hui Mo, who had gained 2 catties of weight in prison, took advantage of the fact that no one was around to sit with his legs crossed and enjoy the delicacies that Tan Siwei had someone bring in. Suddenly, he sneezed loudly. He rubbed his nose and muttered in surprise, "Who's thinking of me? Is it Shizzy Yi? Lady Ning? Or little Forsythia? Hehe, I'm really charming." Then he continued to flip through the novel that he had tricked from Tan Siwei and read with great interest. The carriage continued to move leisurely along the Chaobai River. Thinking that it wouldn't be too late to examine it after Hui Mo came out, Ning Shu temporarily put away the blood-soaked nightgown and said, "Other than this nightgown, I also heard from Princess Changping that the night before the Shenqing Monastery incident, old princess consort Yu specially went to her palace to accompany her for a night and even sang her a nursery rhyme when she was young. Hearing this sensitive time, Xiahou Qing's expression changed slightly. Which song? The Swallow Pecks at the Imperial Grandson. It's a well-known poem by the common people of the Han dynasty. Zhao Feiyan and her younger sister Zhao Hada persecuted the princes, causing Emperor Cheng of Han to have no descendants. Xiahou Qing slowly rubbed the pale finger bone in his palm and let out a meaningful chuckle. This song is interesting. Ning Shu nodded silently. That's right. The common people only know about the legends. They think that Emperor Cheng of Han had no descendants because Zhao Feiyan and her sister were cruel and merciless and killed all his children. But I heard another saying in many ancient books. The reason why Emperor Cheng of Han had no descendants was actually because the Liu family's bloodline was flawed. The successive emperors married their relatives. For example, Emperor Jing of Han married his cousin Lady Bo, Emperor Wu of Han married his cousin Jiao, causing many of his descendants to be crazy. In the end, Emperor Zhao of Han had no descendants, Emperor Xian of Han had 5, and Emperor Yuan of Han had 3. After that, Emperor Cheng, Emperor Ari, and Emperor Ping of Han all had no descendants. The story of the swallow pecks at the imperial grandson was just a fabricated story for the harem. Old princess consort Yu purposely sang this nursery rhyme. Could it be that this story is referring to the current dynasty? Xiahou Qing bent his knuckles and lightly knocked on the small table twice. There are a total of 2 cases in the current dynasty that are related to the imperial family and have affected the entire political situation of the imperial court. Ning Shu reacted quickly and immediately continued. In the 4th year of Heaven's selection, the eldest son and second son of the emperor fought for the throne. And 25 years ago, Empress Ju went crazy and killed the previous crown prince. Her blood dyed the Phoenix Algae Palace and she set fire to Phoenix Terrace. When the last word came out of her mouth, Ning Shu's entire body started to tremble uncontrollably. In the 2 cases, no matter which one old princess consort he was referring to, it meant that the secret and truth they were investigating would be swept into an even bigger and unexplainable flood. Who could guarantee that they would be able to escape unscathed after being swept into this huge wave? Ning Shu revealed a pale smile. The answer was, no one could. She reached out to take a sip of tea to calm herself down. However, the more she tried to do so, the more flustered she became. She accidentally knocked over the teacup and spilled it on his clothes. Your Highness, I'm sorry. Ning Shu hurriedly pulled out a handkerchief and hurriedly helped him wipe it off. A jade-colored hand slowly reached over and gently patted the back of her flustered hand. The owner of that hand lowered his voice and said in a seemingly calm voice, "Don't worry, the sky won't fall before I die. Even if I die and the sky falls, it won't hurt you. I'm here." Ning Shu was stunned. In the carriage, she bent over him, her hand still on his lapel, and he sat upright on the couch, looking up at her. Her skin was as white as snow and his hair was as black as ink. Everything seemed to have returned to 2 months ago, to the early morning when they had made an alliance with each other. The only difference was that their positions had been switched. The carriage continued to move forward along the wide road beside Chaobai River. They inadvertently passed by a small alley where 7 or 8 children were happily singing nursery rhymes they had learned from their elders. Yang Yang, Wei Shigu, Zhonggongzi, time to meet. Wooden door Kang Lang Zhen, swallow flies, pecks the imperial grandson. Imperial grandson dies, swallow pecks the arrow. After they finished singing, the children clapped their hands happily and then chased each other into the depths of the alley, leaving behind a string of bell-like laughter. Inside the carriage, Ning Shu's eyes curved into a smile, her eyes as bright as the moon. "All right, I'm not afraid." Chapter 280. In front of her was a large field of red spider lilies. She stepped barefoot on this beautiful and almost demonic flower field. Bright and beautiful light spots like fireflies slowly floated up from under her feet and surrounded her. Those were the soul fragments from the abyss of hell. She reached out and grabbed one of the light spots, then slowly opened it. She heard the miserable screams and cries from the light spot, whistling towards her and finally completely disappearing. Suddenly, there was a loud sound that shocked the soul, and a palace rose from the ground. In the palace, the huge shadow of King Yama appeared. He had a green face and fangs, and his eyes were wide open in anger. He pointed at the tiny Ning Shu under his feet, and immediately, a cluster of netherworld Li fire burned up from the ground of hell, engulfing her whole body. Her body was being incinerated by the Li fire. Her snow-white skin melted like paper, and her bright red flesh turned into charcoal. She screamed silently in the Li fire and endured until her entire body was burned into a pile of white bones. She turned into powder and fell into the dazzlingly beautiful scarlet flowers. But the punishment was not over. Her broken body was rebuilt from nothingness, and her flesh and skin were pieced back together. She continued to endure the burning of the fire, and so on. In the endless pain, King Yama's bell-like voice invaded her soul, and it was deafening. Because of your brother's life, you turned against Emperor Yang, Xiao Yuni, and caused millions of people to die. The common people were in a terrible situation, and blood flowed like a river. Ning Shu, do you know your wrongs? Surrounded by the fire, she had nowhere to escape. Her body was emitting a strong burnt smell, and even her soul was trembling. She gritted her teeth and said with difficulty, I didn't know. Xiao Yuni killed my brother, causing him to die an unnatural death. If I don't take revenge, I, Ning Shu, am unworthy of being a person. Ning Ji was instigated to kill Empress Fei Luan first. She deserves this. If we talk about the reason, it was also Xiao Yuni who went against his oath. My brother Ji only felt injustice for me. What wrong did he do? King Yang Luo shook his head and sighed, revenge breeds revenge. When will there ever be an end to it? Don't be obsessed with it. I'll give you one more chance. Ning Shu, do you know your wrongs? Ning Shu's upper body was half bone. Her lips were burnt black and full of blood. She screamed in endless pain, I don't know. I, Ning Shu, will never admit my mistakes. How stubborn. The phantom of King Yang Luo suddenly expanded and angrily pointed at Ning Shu. The mandate book in his hand flipped like waves. You were blinded by love. You were greedy because of love. You were angry because you couldn't get what you wanted. You were disgusted because of separation. You were guilty of the 3 sins of greed, anger, and blindness. I betrayed you in accordance with the law for 3,000 years in the Blade Mountain prison and 3,000 years in the Blazing Inferno prison. Men, carry out the punishment. The ground beneath her feet collapsed like sand, revealing a sea of fire that was tens of thousands of times larger than the Li fire of the netherworld. In the sea of fire, thousands of ghosts were howling in pain at the bottom of the abyss, reaching out their scorched black claws to her. And among the thousands of ghosts, 274 of them were particularly familiar. They were her deceased parents and relatives, including her little brother, Ji. She immediately froze as if she had turned into ashes. Even her soul had been shattered. They were supposed to enter the cycle of reincarnation after washing away their sins and be reborn as humans. But because of you, they are also suffering the pain of being burned by the fire. Ning Shu, do you still want to continue being stubborn because of love? The phantom of King Yang Luo behind her gradually turned into a thick black shadow, and then transformed into Xiao Yuni's appearance. He questioned her again and again behind her, Ning Shu, do you still want to implicate your family and cause them to never be reincarnated because of love? Ning Shu, do you still want to be obsessed with greed, anger, and blindness? Do you still not let go of resentment and hate? Do you still want to watch them beg for death in the fire? She covered the only heart that was left behind the charred skeleton. She reached out to the fire, kneeling on the ground and crying, no, no, no. Chapter 281. I admit my mistake. The person in the black fog continued to let out a cold, mechanical laugh and said in her ear, don't repeat the same mistake. Otherwise, everyone will still die, including Xiaoho Qing. The scene around her instantly disappeared and turned into a chaotic black fog that wrapped around her. Ning Shu suddenly opened her eyes. She clutched her heart that was in extreme pain and desperately gasped for breath. Her eyes looked in the direction of the roof and her gaze fell into the void. Her entire body was ice-cold and even her sleeping clothes were soaked in cold sweat. Her limbs seemed to be infected by the pain of digging out her bones and chiseling her marrow in her dream and slightly trembled. She got up with difficulty and scooped a handful of cold water from the copper basin and splashed it on her face. Only then did she completely separate herself from the nightmare from several hundred years ago and wake up. She looked at the illusory reflection in the copper basin and let out a self-deprecating laugh. Look at you, an old ghost of several hundred years. You clearly knew that the dream was a dream, yet you were still scared to this extent. You're so stupid. If Meng Po, who fetched soup on the Bridge of Helplessness, knew about this, she would definitely laugh at her for another 300 years. After laughing, she slowly calmed down and silently calculated in her heart. There were still 4 months left until she turned 17. There was 1 day left until the bitter pain in her blood was also the same time limit. After 4 months, if she still couldn't solve all the mysteries, then everything would repeat the mistakes of her first life. However, her true opponent was still hidden in the fog. She didn't know what kind of mask they were wearing, and she didn't even know who was behind the mask. She didn't even know if they were male or female, old or young. Did she really have the ability to change all of this? King Chujiang, King Chujiang, it's rare for you to go against the heavens and change my fate to obtain this chance to live again. If I let you down, then what should I do? Bang, bang, bang. The familiar knocking on the door sounded again and interrupted her wild thoughts. Fang Mama's methodical voice sounded as usual, Imperial Bodyguard Ning, get up. His Highness the Heir is waiting to serve you in the unknown hall. It's best if you hurry up and don't let the master wait too long. For the first time, Ning Shu felt that Nanny Fang's voice was so pleasant and full of vitality. It pulled her back from the hopeless hell and back to the present world, full of vitality. Her heavy heart calmed down a lot. She quickly wiped her face and stood up. She changed back into the bodyguard uniform that Xiahou Qing had specially made for her. She opened the door and walked out with a smile. Okay, Fang Mama, this subordinate will go now. Walking along the winding flower corridors of the Prince of Nanping's residence, the green leaves on both sides still had morning dew. Round droplets dripped down along the veins of the leaves and landed on another leaf. After bouncing a few times, they slid down the branches and into the soil. The white clouds in the sky were soft, and not far away, the crabapple fruit was quietly condensing. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the refreshing morning air. At the end of the flower corridor and the unknown hall, the familiar ink-colored figure stood under the eaves, reaching out to caress the coquettish oriole in his palm. Looking at that figure, Ning Shu's footsteps hesitated. The cold voice in her dream sounded again in her mind, making her feel apprehensive, making her hesitate, making her unable to not hesitate. But Xiahou Qing under the eaves seemed to hear her footsteps. He turned his face, letting go of the oriole in his palm, and silently waved at her. A gentle breeze blew away the condensed clouds, and she heard the clear cries of the orioles. Ning Shu looked at the hand that was beckoning her not far away. One lonely wing found another, and her fluctuating heart finally had a breather. She quickened her steps to meet him. In order to live up to King Chujiang's good intentions, and to not let Meng Po laugh at her, she could only work hard to live a long life, along with her family and Xiahou Qing. Unless she turned into ashes, she would not allow a second ending. Chapter 282. The capital was located at the heart of the entire country, and it was the most prosperous place in the Great Yu. After 300 years of sedimentation, it gradually formed the 4 major characteristics of buying horses in the north, tea in the south, wine and food in the east, and smile in the west. The last word smile naturally referred to the sweet smiles of the women in the street. The Dragon Boat Festival had just passed, and the east was more lively than usual. In order to attract more customers, the merchants along the river were resourceful, and the Dragon Boat Race on the Chaobai River would be held until the end of the month. Sure enough, there was an endless stream of tourists, crowding both sides of the river. Looking at the turning oars in the water and the competing bows of the boats, they clapped and cheered. The vendors along the river also made a lot of money, smiling so widely that their eyes could not be seen. Now was the most popular season for selling dumplings at the food stalls. The snow-white glutinous rice was soaked in mountain spring water 2 hours in advance, and the grains were soaked until they were white and plump and full. Then, with the rich stuffing, they were wrapped in green bamboo leaves, and a dazzling silk thread had been firmly tied into a triangle. The boiling water in the big pot could not wait any longer, and with dozens of splashing sounds, the pot was full. At this time, one must not be careless, and one must keep one's eyes firmly fixed on the heat. When the time came, one must immediately lift the pot. The fragrance of the bamboo leaves, the fragrance of the glutinous rice, and the stuffing together overflowed half of the street, making one's mouth water. If one liked sweet, one would buy sweet date dumplings, and if one liked salty, one would buy dried rice dumplings. The boiling hot dumplings were taken out of the hot soup, and the green bamboo leaves were peeled off layer by layer, and the process of looking forward to the rich stuffing inside was the greatest enjoyment in the world. On Chunghua Street, in front of the most famous snack stall, dozens of hands holding copper coins surrounded the stall owner. Ning Shu squeezed out of the crowd with difficulty, holding 2 steaming hot dumplings, and was already sweating profusely. She looked back, and at the end of the surging tide of people was a tall Chinese redbud tree, with lush branches and leaves. Above her head, the brilliant sunlight shuttled back and forth through the gaps between the leaves, sprinkling golden fragments on the body of a young man wearing a frost-colored robe under the tree. He was extremely tall and straight, and the outer layer of his silk robe, painted with an ink pattern of distant mountains and long clouds, fluttered slightly in the wind. He did not need to speak, but he already had a noble and lofty aura, making people unable to help but slow down, wanting to see his true appearance. It was a pity that such a dazzling man was wearing a veiled hat on his head, which completely covered his face, causing the young girls who passed by to feel hatred in their hearts. Of course, this veil hat was worn by Ning Shu, who begged Xiahou Qing to wear it. The reason was, she was in her prime, and did not want to be trampled to death by the embroidered shoes of the tens of thousands of young girls in the market who wanted to see the handsome face of the heir. It seemed that Ning Shu had been waiting impatiently for a long time, and behind the veil hat, Xiahou Qing could not help but wrinkle his eyebrows. It was not until he heard the familiar sound of footsteps coming from afar that he slowly relaxed his eyebrows. Ning Shu's warm voice, like a dumpling, sounded in his ear. "Your Highness, I have already peeled off the bamboo leaves for you. While it is still warm, you should quickly try it. This is the best dumpling maker in the entire capital, and the stuffing is also the best and freshest. I guarantee with my life that it is absolutely delicious." As she spoke, she enthusiastically delivered the peeled dumplings to Xiahou Qing's lips. Xiahou Qing couldn't understand why she had lined up for an hour to flatter him for 2 rice dumplings. "For me, food is just food to fill my stomach. As for the taste, whether it's sour, sweet, bitter, or spicy, it doesn't make any difference whether it's delicious or not." Ning Shu was not dispirited at all. She pinched her sleeve to wipe the sweat from her forehead and said, "Whether it is delicious or not, you may not know it with your mouth, but your heart knows. Especially my daughter." "Ah, no. This subordinate spent a lot of effort to buy these dumplings. Even if you can't tell with your mouth, your Highness will definitely feel that it is delicious in your heart." Her voice was like a sparrow's chirping, and it was even more lively than the cicadas in the redbud tree above them. Xiahou Qing lightly snorted, preposterous logic. But in the end, he took the dumplings in her hand and put them into his mouth, slowly eating a few bites. How is it? Does your Highness feel this subordinate's good intentions?" Ning Shu blinked her eyes, expectantly waiting for him to praise her. Xiahou Qing indifferently said, "It's only so." Ning Shu curled her lips and a handkerchief flew over. "Use this to wipe your sweat. Don't always use your sleeve. Aren't you afraid of getting dirty?" The owner of the handkerchief coldly said this, then turned around and continued walking. Ning Shu took the handkerchief and looked at his tall back. She secretly stuck out her tongue, ridiculing in her heart, "Awkwardness is a kind of illness that needs to be treated." But how did he know she was using her sleeve to wipe her sweat? Although this person's eyes were blurry, his heart was full of wisdom. He didn't need to look. Nothing could be hidden from him. Today was the 9th of the 5th month, 8 days away from Princess Changping's marriage. Wen Hui Niang, who had been sent out as bait, suddenly died in her home. The cause of death was a dagger shot from a flying crossbow that pierced her throat. When the Prince of Nanping's personal guards chased after the assassin, they found a token that belonged to the 7th prince's estate. Ning Xu had just accompanied Xiahou Qing to the scene of the crime, but found nothing. Wen Hui Niang's son, Qian Bingyi's wails were still ringing in their ears. Ning Xu thought for a moment, then dragged Xiahou Qing to the nearby Eastern market to stroll around and watch the commotion. As she slowly walked behind Xiahou Qing, Ning Xu bit into the sweet dumplings in her hand. It shouldn't be Xiao Yunsan's doing. Assassins in charge of assassinations wouldn't carry anything that could reveal their identities in order to avoid being exposed. A token like this is too clumsy. Chapter 283. After finishing the dumplings, Xiahou Qing seemed to be in a better mood. His voice was less tense. Xiao Yunsan's maternal family is a new noble family from Ji province. His mother entered the palace in the 6th year of Heaven's Choice. Whether it was 25 years ago or the 4th year of Heaven's Choice, it had nothing to do with her. I can't find a reason to implicate him. Ning Xu nodded. That dagger is quite interesting. It looks normal, but the handle has a few whorls on it to make it easier to grasp and accurately stab the enemy. It's a new style that the Ministry of War came up with this year. Perhaps we can continue our investigation based on it. In addition, according to the pursuing guards, he cut the assassin's right arm. That's also a breakthrough. Originally, they thought they'd pull out a big fish through Wen Huanyang. They hadn't expected the other side to go all the way and directly silence Wen Huanyang. What did this mean? The other side had already noticed their recent actions and understood their thoughts. Moreover, he wasn't afraid they'd find anything, so he didn't ask Wen Huanyang a single question and directly silenced her. He was using this as a demonstration. Even if you find traces, I'm not afraid, because the deer's neck will always be in my hands. How annoying. For the time being, Ning Xu didn't want to think about this depressing matter. She put the last sweet and delicate red date into her mouth. Right, I heard from Princess Changping that Your Highness agreed to help her escape the predicament of a political marriage. I'm very curious, how does Your Highness plan to deal with this matter? Southern Yang had come aggressively, clearly wanting to use the political marriage as an excuse to extort the dowry from the 10 cities. Of all of His Majesty's princesses, the 13th princess was the least favored. In addition, the 13th princess's identity had been exposed in the Shenqing monastery case. Although His Majesty had ordered them to keep their mouths shut, they were sure to have a fishbone stuck in their throat. It wouldn't be easy to convince His Majesty to change the candidate. Thus, Ning Xu wanted to know what Xiahou Qing was planning. A substitute. Xiahou Qing was concise and to the point. As far as I know, the envoys from the Southern Yang Kingdom haven't seen the 13th princess's face yet. They've only seen her portrait. So the simplest way is to directly choose a substitute to marry in her place. Ning Xu put down the dumplings in her hands and tilted her head, saying, "This method is good, but this marriage alliance is no small matter." The Southern Yang Kingdom came with wild ambitions. If they find out that the princess is someone else in disguise, I'm afraid they will use this as a pretext to make a fuss and create an even bigger disaster. Moreover, it is said that the envoy from the Southern Yang Empire is not someone easy to deal with. She recalled the situation on the day of old consort Yu's funeral and pursed her lips in disgust. Wine, women, wealth, and power were all present. His reputation was extremely bad. He had only been in Great Yu for half a month, but he had already been criticized by many people. Moreover, he was cunning and cunning. Whether it was in Great Yu or Beishuan, his notoriety was widespread. Xiahou Qing unhurriedly said, "Therefore, there is a second step. When the Southern Yang envoys leave Great Yu with the princess's carriage and set foot on Southern Yang's territory, they will encounter an unexpected disaster in the middle of the night. The princess will be burned to death, and not even her bones will be left. This is a wonderful move." Ning Xu couldn't help but clap her hands in praise. If the princess is taken away by them and met with danger in another country's territory, it will be the southern Yang kingdom's responsibility. At that time, they won't have the face to say anything, let alone mention the marriage alliance. Instead, they will be somewhat in the wrong in front of Great Yu. As for the matter of the dowry of 10 cities, it will also disappear like smoke in thin air. Ning Shu thought for a moment and said, "It's just that, in this way, Princess Changping will no longer be able to show her true identity in front of others. She will no longer have a luxurious house or a luxurious life. Perhaps she will even have to conceal her identity and hide. Is she willing to accept such a consequence?" Xiahou Qing's voice was as light as the wind. "I have already explained the consequences to her. She has accepted it, so when the time comes, I will help her create a new identity and help her leave the capital. The rest will be up to her to decide." Ning Shu thought of Xiao Changping's incomprehensible wish, which others couldn't understand, but she could only hope for but not achieve. She nodded in understanding. Leaving the imperial palace, leaving the identity of a princess, for her, it might be simpler and happier. "I hope she will be able to fulfill her wish." As the two were whispering to each other, Xiahou Qing's ears twitched. He suddenly said, "Be careful." He reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her in his direction. In the next instant, a figure rushed out from the alley they had just passed, almost knocking Ning Shu to the ground. Ju Sai hurriedly stepped forward to stop the figure that had suddenly appeared. With a glance, she saw that it was a 16 or 17-year-old budding young girl. The young girl wore a plain cloth dress and her hands were covered in blood. Holding a pair of scissors, she shouted behind her, "Don't come over. Let me die." Chapter 284. At this time, the sun was shining brightly. It was the busiest time of the day. The people went out to work, wash, and do small business. When they heard the movement at the entrance of the alley, they immediately surrounded them like flies smelling blood. "Isn't this Li San-er's daughter, Yi-er? Oh my, she's taking things too hard again. How pitiful. After such a thing, her innocence is gone. How can she pretend that it didn't happen? Did you hear that when the Sun family found Yi-er by the river that morning, her clothes were in a mess, her undergarment was far away, and she fainted? That situation was a big blow to an unmarried girl's family. I really don't know who did such a thing. I hope God will open his eyes and punish that evil person quickly. What's the use of being struck by lightning? If you lose your reputation, then so be it. Look, the Zhu family came this morning to cancel the marriage. I guess she won't be able to get married in the future. Who can be blamed for this? Li San-er can only blame himself for being greedy for money. All day long, he asked a virgin to sell flowers to make money in public. Otherwise, he wouldn't have encountered such a thing. Don't talk about it. Last month, a girl in Pingning Square also had such a thing. At night, when everyone was asleep, she crawled into the well and drowned. Hearing the discussion of the neighbors, the girl called Yi-er's face became paler. More tears gushed out from her pair of hopeless eyes. She struggled to break free from Ju Sai's hand and bent down to beg as if she couldn't bear it. "Please don't talk about it. I didn't, I really didn't. I'm innocent. You all believe me." But the more she acted like this, the more those who were watching the fun, chatting, teasing, unintentional, and malicious eyes surrounded her from all directions. They were like knives, cutting off her flesh piece by piece. There were a few sloppy gangsters in the crowd. While throwing melon seed shells, they mocked, "Li San-er is an ugly cripple. It's rare for him to raise such a beautiful daughter. He's just ruining her body for no reason. Now she has become a withered flower. TSK TSK TSK, what a pity, what a pity. She should have agreed with me. That's right. Who asked her to look down on our boss? Now she has suffered retribution. She deserves it. Now, kneeling down and begging a man to marry you is just wishful thinking. Ha 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 ha." The words of those ruffians and scoundrels were extremely ear-piercing. The last bit of color on Yi-er's face faded away. Other than the tears on her face, she looked as if she was dead. Many people frowned in disgust and moved away, but no one dared to stop them. Behind the crowd, a clean and gentle voice said, "Buddha said, Those who sow discord, spread false rumors, slander, and glib tongues should be put in the steamer prison after death. They would be cooked alive in the steamer. After being steamed, a cold wind would blow and reconstruct their bodies. Then, they would be sent to the tongue-pulling prison. The little ghost in prison pried open the person's mouth, clamped the tongue with a pair of iron pliers, and pulled it out. It was not pulled out in one go, but stretched it out and slowly pulled it out. This process repeated until all the sins of the person were eliminated. Which one of you has the guts to scare me? Courting death. It turned out to be a skinny kid. He looked delicate and pretty, and his chin was as sharp as a girl's. What's the matter? Do you want to spar with me? Ouch. Those ruffians pushed through the crowd and wanted to find Ning Shu to settle the score. Suddenly, they felt a sharp pain in their bodies and fell to the ground. Damn it, when the ruffians saw that it was actually gold that hit them, they immediately fell back to the ground. Boss, it's gold. Quickly pick it up. The leader of the ruffians slapped them on the head. Pick up your mother's head. Quickly go. If they could use gold to hit people, they would be courting death if they didn't run away. Looking at these people who ran away with their tails between their legs, Ning Shu sneered in disdain. She whispered to the man who had been calm from the beginning to the end, I've troubled your highness to lend a helping hand and generously donate money again. Don't worry, this will be added to your account together with the medical expenses. Hair. Your highness is really clear about public and private matters. Should we also include the interest? Good idea. You reminded me. Then, according to the market's 30% interest rate. While she was arguing with Xiahou Qing, Ning Shu glanced out of the corner of her eye and saw Yi's Adam's apple rolling. Yi's footsteps faltered. Yi hardened her heart and suddenly raised her hand to stab her own heart. Don't. There was no second thought in her heart. Ning Shu subconsciously rushed forward and grabbed the scissors. Because she used too much strength, the scissors pierced deeply into her palm. Thick blood dripped down the scissors to the ground. Chapter 285. Yi was shocked and stunned. The scissors had been snatched away by Ning Shu. A woman in coarse linen rushed over and hugged Yi, who was in despair. She cried, Yi, don't take it too hard. I'm begging you. Yi was trembling all over. She curled herself into a ball with her back facing everyone. She slowly bent her knees and slid down to kneel on the ground. Mother. Let me die. I can't live like this anymore. The woman's dry lips moved. I'm useless. I couldn't protect you. But I only have one daughter. If you seek death, I can't live anymore. Why don't I die with you? Let's end this once and for all. As they spoke, the two of them stood up and ran towards the direction of Chaobai River. Fortunately, the neighbors stopped them and did not let them jump into the river together. Being held back by the neighbors' aunts, Yi's heart was as dead as ashes. Only her tears were still flowing. She kept murmuring, please let me die. I'm begging you. A few soft-hearted women followed her and wiped their tears, shouting that they had sinned. Looking at this scene, Ning Shu threw the scissors in her hand on the ground. She walked to Yi and asked calmly, do you think it's your fault? If you think so, then you can jump into the river. I'll block it for you. I guarantee that no one will stop you. Yi's closed eyes trembled. She did not say anything. Ning Shu said faintly, it seems that you think so. Then please step aside. Even if she doesn't die today, she will die tomorrow. Instead of letting her suffer, it's better to fulfill her wish earlier. She spoke so heartlessly that she was met with many women's cold frowns. Just as Ning Shu was indifferently dispersing the crowd for her, Yi finally opened her mouth slowly and said in a mosquito-like voice, no. It's not my fault. It's not. She took a deep breath, clutched her chest, and cried out, that evening, I was selling flowers in Shui City as usual. When I was about to return home, Miss Susu from Zunfang Tai sent someone to ask if there were any jade hairpin flowers. If there were, send them all to her. She needed them urgently. I thought that the flower had medicine, so Miss Susu must have been sick, so I went there. I knew it wasn't a proper place, so I walked very fast on the way back. I didn't expect that when I was about to leave the alley, someone bumped into me. I didn't know him. I picked up the basket and was about to leave, but I ran as fast as I could and almost ran away, but it was too dark and I accidentally stepped on a pebble and fainted. But I'm innocent. It's not my fault, it's really not. The ice on Ning Shu's face finally melted. He squatted down and gently wiped away the tears on her face with his left hand. Yes, you're right. It's really not your fault. It's someone else who did evil. He should be the one who should die and go to hell. Why do you want to end your life so easily because of this? If the other party knows that you committed suicide, how do you think he will react? Guilt. Dream on. He can't wait for you to die. If you die, he can continue to do evil things with peace of mind. But are you willing? When you step on the road to the underworld and hear that person's mocking laughter, will you really not regret it? Think about it carefully. The huge teardrops dripped down like pearls. Said helplessly, but, what should I do? Every time I step out of the door, I hear a lot of people pointing at me behind. Even Brother Ju abandoned me. I'm so useless. I'm really not that strong, Ning Shu said slowly. There are bad people and good people in this world. There are even more people who are neither good nor bad. Everyone has a mouth. We can't stop what they want to say, but we can decide whether to listen or not. The more others want you to live like a pile of mud so that they can talk about you, the more you should live well and give those people a slap in the face. Of course, if you really can't hold on, there's another way. Leave the capital and go to a place where no one knows you. No one knows what you've encountered, and no one will point at you. Everything starts again. Isn't that good? Is this really okay? Ning Shu patted the back of her hand gently to give her strength. Yes, or you can try it first. If it really doesn't work, it's not too late to go to that dead end. You're only a teenager. There are still a lot of delicious food that you haven't eaten, a lot of beautiful scenery that you haven't seen, and a lot of people that you haven't met. Go and take a look before you decide, okay? The storm calmed down. There was no more excitement to watch. The crowd that gathered gradually dispersed. They watched the mother and daughter who were hugging each other leave. Walked forward hesitantly. In the end, she turned around and said to her, "Can I know the name of my benefactor?" Ning Shu cupped her hands angrily. "Oh, my surname is Ning. My name is Ning Ping. It's just a small matter. Don't call me benefactor. I don't deserve it." E's eyes sparkled. She bent her knees and saluted. "Thank you, little brother Ning. Will never forget what you said today." Ning Shu smiled and waved at her until a hand behind her took her back. Behind her, Xiahou Qing said coldly, "Are you playing the hero to save beauty? Are you addicted? In any case, she's a little beauty. I can't watch her die with my own eyes. Moreover, we're both women. I can't ask her to repay me with her body." Xiahou Qing pulled up the corner of his mouth. "It sounds like you're quite regretful. You're really something." Ning Shu quickly shook her head like a rattledrum. No, how would this subordinate dare? This subordinate will always be loyal to your highness. However, if she secretly pledges her heart to me because of this, it's not something this subordinate can stop. Alas. Xiahou Qing smacked her head. Ning Shu quickly blocked her head. Xiahou Qing accidentally touched her right hand. He frowned when he noticed the unusual sticky liquid on her hand. "What's the matter? Are you bleeding?" When I took the girl's scissors, I accidentally cut it. I was wrong. Your Highness, don't be angry. I was really wrong. Ning Shu originally thought that this was just a small storm that happened by chance. She didn't expect that 3 days later, a big case that shocked the court would happen. Chapter 286. 7 in the morning. Ordinary people were going out to work, opening shops and setting up stalls. Their work was in full swing, but inside the Seeking Fragrance terrace, it was silent. The delicate and beautiful girls had used all their skills to serve the guests for an entire night, and were currently enjoying a sound sleep. The procuress who got up early was counting the accounts from the day before with a golden abacus, her eyes shining. The pimp who had been urged to get up was lazily arranging the tables and chairs that had been messed up by the guests. He raised his head and gave a big yawn. Suddenly, drip, drip, 2 drops of water fell from the top of his head, making him very annoyed. Motherfucker, which bitch accidentally spilled the water again? See if I don't teach her a lesson. The pimp cursed as he rolled up his sleeves and prepared to go upstairs. Then, the 3rd drop of water fell, coincidentally hitting the back of his hand. Feeling that the liquid was unusually sticky, he was stunned. He looked down and then, what? The Southern Yang envoy is dead. In the Prince of Nanping's residence, Ning Shu was stupefied when she heard the news from Heaven's Inquisition. Heaven's Inquisition vividly described, yes, it was at Xuanfang Terrace in the West City. A pimp found it first around 7 in the morning. At that time, he was wiping the table downstairs when he felt water dripping from the top of his head. When he crawled upstairs, the corpse of the Southern Yang envoy was already lying on his back. Blood flowed all over the floor and dripped down. It was said that the death was miraculous and tragic. Now that the news has been sent to the palace, the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Justice have already surrounded the entire Xuanfang Terrace. Among Xiahou Qing's 4 capable assistants, Heaven's Inquisition was the best at collecting information. Every day, he would pass through the streets and alleys. All kinds of gossip and news from various manors would be gathered by him in less than an hour, and he would send it back to the manor at the fastest speed. He was a human-shaped parrot spirit. Ning Shu sighed and shook her head. The envoy of the Southern Yang Kingdom, no matter how hateful he was, had suddenly died in the capital of the Great Yu. This was not an easy matter to deal with. His Majesty was probably so anxious that smoke was coming out of his head. What about the murderer? Have you found him? All the girls and maids at Xuanfang Terrace have been arrested and are being tortured. The guests who stayed at Xuanfang Terrace have also been dragged into the Supreme Court for interrogation. However, this matter is really troublesome. What do you mean? Tianwen spread out his hands and said, the envoy is about to leave the capital, so a banquet was held at Xuanfang Terrace last night. Many courtiers and their sons were invited, including the eldest son of the Prime Minister and the 7th Prince. TSK, Ning Shu felt the same way. When it rains, it pours. This was it. The sudden death of an envoy was an extremely sensitive matter. If it was not handled properly, it would definitely affect the relationship between the 2 countries. The lives of countless people would be affected, and even the fate of the Great Yu Kingdom would be affected. However, in such a troublesome matter, the Prince of the Great Yu Kingdom had a foot in it. This time, His Majesty should be bald. True enough. Inside the Zichen Hall, the floor was filled with debris. You unfilial son. His Majesty slapped Xiao Yunsen across the face. Blood seeped out of the corner of Xiao Yunsen's mouth and he fell to his knees. Everyone in the hall was in danger. No one dared to plead for mercy for him, fearing that His Majesty's rage would affect them and their lives would be in danger. Xiao Yunsen was full of grievances. He covered his face and said, Imperial Father, this matter really has nothing to do with Hen. Last night, the envoy held a banquet and repeatedly sent people to invite this son. This son didn't want to go at first, but that envoy said that if this son didn't show up, it would mean that this son wasn't giving face to him and Southern Yang Kingdom. Hen was a coward and did not dare to ruin His Majesty's plans, so he reluctantly went to the banquet. However, Hen only stayed for a short while before returning to the palace. The palace guards and the palace eunuchs and maids can all testify for Hen. That's right, there's also Imperial Mother. Last night, Imperial Mother came to Urchin's palace to remind Hen to study hard. How could the envoy's death be caused by Hen? Imperial Father, you have always understood Hen, so please believe in Hen. Chapter 287. Then why didn't the envoy invite your 4th imperial brother or 6th imperial brother? Why did he invite you again and again? Isn't it because of your bad conduct? And you want me to believe you? Even if I do, what's the use? Will the courtiers believe you? Will the people believe you? Will Southern Yang believe you? I've told you more than once that as a prince, you must be upright and strict. Don't learn from your little uncle and wander around those brothels. But you've repeatedly broken the rules behind my back and even gathered your subordinates to deceive me. You're simply, the emperor waved his sleeves and angrily said, "Come, beat all the eunuchs around the seventh prince to death." Everyone in the hall immediately knelt down, the eunuchs all cried and begged for mercy. Xiao Yunsan pulled on the emperor's robe and begged, "Father, they're innocent. It's all Urchin's fault. Please punish Ursi Hen." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Wang Han, was from Xiao Yunsan's mother's family, so he had to speak up for him. "Your Majesty, please calm down. The case hasn't been solved yet. The eunuchs around the seventh prince are all witnesses. If they're all beaten to death, there will be more criticism. It won't be too late to punish them after the case is solved." The emperor was angry. At this time, a eunuch came in and reported, "Your Majesty, the deputy envoy of Southern Yang wants to see you and ask for an explanation. He's outside the hall and we can't stop him." The emperor's head buzzed as he spoke. Xiao Yunsan quickly got up to support him. The emperor pushed him away and returned to the throne. He held the cold golden armrest and lowered his head. He gritted his teeth and angrily glared at the courtiers. "Now that Southern Yang wants an explanation, my beloved courtiers, what do you think we should do? The Supreme Court, the Ministry of Justice, the Jingji province, and my Prime Minister Tan, your eldest son, is also involved." Every time the emperor pointed out a yamen, there would be a few heads hanging down in fear. The most difficult part of this case wasn't how to solve it, but how to take the responsibility of resolving Southern Yang's anger after the case was solved. If they couldn't resolve it, it was fine to lose a head, but they might even kill all 9 generations. This burden was too heavy. Only a fool would take the initiative to accept it. In the crowd, Tan Siwei hesitated for a moment. Just as he was about to raise his head, he was forcefully pulled down by the Supreme Court official, Feng Zheng. The emperor looked around and laughed in anger. "Haha, it seems like my beloved subjects want me to solve this case personally. Good. This is great. Your subjects are terrified." The courtiers knelt down one after another. Wang Han trembled as he wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, I remember that Ning Shu, the legitimate daughter of Duke Ning, had some ingenious ideas in the previous cases. Why don't we release her from prison? Perhaps she can solve the urgent problem at hand." Who didn't know how hot this sweet potato was? Tan Siwei frowned and immediately said, "Lord Wang, we're all men here, yet you're letting a woman lead the charge. I'm afraid it's inappropriate." Wang Han mocked, "Then the Supreme Court is prepared to take on this responsibility." The Supreme Court official, Feng Zheng, hurriedly cried out. He clutched his chest and said that he had a headache. He said that he was old and incompetent. As the highest official of the Supreme Court, even if Tan Siwei wanted to, he had no right to make this decision. Thinking of Ning Shu, his baby face showed deep worry. Hearing Ning Shu's name, the emperor subconsciously frowned. After careful consideration, his eyebrows slowly relaxed. He said in a low voice, "Then release the daughter of the Ning family. I want to see her. Tell her that if she can solve this case smoothly, all her previous crimes will be forgiven." In the prison of the Ministry of Justice, Hui Mo, who was secretly nibbling on a piece of dessert with his back facing the emperor, heard that he was summoned. The dessert in his hand fell to the ground. Suddenly, the book in his hand was no longer fragrant. He walked out of the prison of the Ministry of Justice with small steps and lowered his head. He followed the eunuch beside the emperor and drove into the palace. He was so anxious that his hands were full of cold sweat. If he was asked to perform an autopsy, he wouldn't be afraid, as he could give an 80 or 90% accurate answer. But if he was asked to analyze the case in front of His Majesty and the Southern Yang Kingdom's envoy, even if he had great ability, he couldn't learn from Miss Ning's fearlessness in the face of danger. It was over. He was going to be exposed. Would the emperor directly order him to be beheaded? Wouldn't that mean that the fact that he secretly switched Lady Ning would be exposed? Damn the envoy. You could have died at any time. Why did you have to die in the capital? You killed me. While he was being driven to the brick that led to the Zichen Palace Hall, he was sobbing in his heart with tears streaming down his face. Just when he was so anxious that his heart was in his throat, he suddenly saw the 13th princess coming over with a few palace maids. When she passed by the 13th princess, she suddenly said, "Wait. Isn't this Ning Shu, who was summoned by the emperor to the palace to analyze the case?" The emperor was waiting in the Zichen palace. The head eunuch was anxious. "Yes. The emperor is waiting in the Zichen palace. Princess, please allow this servant to send her in. I will report the details to the princess later." Xiao Zhongping said, "Since she is meeting the emperor, how can she be so sloppy and disheveled? How can she dirty the emperor's eyes? If the deputy envoy takes a look, he will think that there is no one in the Great Yu. So, he will casually find a beggar to make up the numbers. The emperor will be even angrier. Eunuch, I am afraid that you won't be able to afford it." The head eunuch just showed a hesitant look. Xiao Zhongping had already ordered to take her away. "Someone, immediately take her to my palace to tidy up. I will be back soon." "Hey, princess." Being forcibly dragged away by a palace maid, Hui Mo was still confused. He didn't understand what was going on. He heard the palace maid whisper in a very familiar voice, "Don't worry. It's me. Lady Ning." Hui Mo was so excited that his eyes were filled with tears. If it weren't for his status, he would have knelt down and hugged Ning Shu's thigh. Chapter 288. After the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, Ning Shu walked step by step up the jade steps leading to Zichen Palace Hall. She never would have thought that she would be released from the Ministry of Justice's prison because of the envoy's death. She couldn't help but tease, "If that's the case, it's all thanks to the envoy, sir. It's a pity that he has already stepped into the Yellow Springs and won't be able to hear her thanks." She had just stepped into Zichen Palace Hall when she heard the deputy envoy of Nanjiao yelling in the hall, "If you can't find the culprit who killed our envoy within 3 days, then please give us 10 more cities as an apology." "Ha, what a big tone." Ning Shu raised an eyebrow and looked into the hall with interest. As expected, His Majesty's face had turned green. All the courtiers were extremely indignant. Xu Jin, the scholar of Jiao Wen Palace Hall, had started arguing with the deputy envoy. However, the envoy's corpse was still lying in the ice room of the Supreme Court, so even their argument was weakened. Just as the atmosphere in the hall was at daggers drawn, Ning Shu slowly walked in. She first bowed to the emperor and then leisurely walked in front of the deputy envoy. She smiled and said, "Reporting to the deputy envoy, sir, there is no need for 3 days. A stick of incense is enough." The deputy envoy looked up and down and saw that the one who interrupted was a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her appearance was outstanding, but the words she said made him laugh his head off. He snorted coldly and reprimanded, "Where did this silly girl come from, speaking nonsense here? You can catch the real culprit in the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. That's the biggest joke in the world." Ning Shu wasn't angry at all when she was looked at with such disdain. Her tone was casual as she said, "Just find someone to take the blame." She spread her hands indifferently. Maybe a manservant was greedy for money and wanted to steal the envoy's belongings and was discovered by the envoy. The manservant killed the envoy in a fit of excitement, or the envoy stole the beloved girl of other guests and killed for love after getting drunk. In short, just make up a story and push someone to be executed. This matter couldn't be simpler. If the deputy envoy wants to solve the case as quickly as possible and not find the real culprit, then not to mention 1, even 10 or 100 you can be delivered to the deputy envoy's hands. The deputy envoy was even angrier. He stepped forward and said, "Of course I want the real culprit. Let me warn you, if I find out that you are casually looking for someone to take the blame for you, and are trying to fob off Southern Yang, then don't blame us for flattening Great Yu's land with our iron hoof." Such unbridled arrogance simply did not put Great Yu in his eyes at all, and did not put His Majesty in his eyes at all. His Majesty's hand on the dragon throne almost broke the armrest. But even though they were angry, no one could deny the fact that ever since Emperor Shizu encountered the coup of the 3 princes, his fear of military power had risen to the extreme. Since then, he had begun a century-long policy of valuing the civil and belittling the military. Even if his successors occasionally had the heart to reform, it was difficult to change the old habits. In the end, it was just a drop in the bucket. And in the current dynasty, there were very few famous generals. Since the death of old Prince Yu, Great Yu had painfully lost a fierce general. Now, in the entire vast region of Great Yu, only Prince Nanping's residence in Cloud Swallow Province could be considered a mainstay, defending the country to death. A country that had the richest land and the most prosperous economy in the 9 provinces did not have the sharp claws and teeth to match it. It was like a fat rabbit that was naked in front of the shining eyes of a pack of wolves. If Southern Yang decided to send troops at this time, for Great Yu, it would definitely be an unbearable heavy blow. This was also the reason why Southern Yang had always been arrogant and unbridled. Ning Shu's eyes flashed with a touch of coldness, but it quickly disappeared. She continued to maintain a polite attitude, neither servile nor overbearing attitude, and said with a chuckle, "Since the deputy envoy has chosen the real culprit, then Great Yu will be 100 times more cautious and investigate carefully. After confirming that there is no mistake, then we will send the answer to the deputy envoy. Of course, if the deputy envoy has doubts, you can also participate and help us solve the case. My Great Yu and Southern Yang's peaceful coexistence is clear. Otherwise, His Majesty would not agree to send his most beloved little princess to your country for a political marriage. His Majesty is so sincere, if the deputy envoy still has any complaints, he will open his mouth and ask for 10 more cities as an apology. This will make the 9 regions suspicious, and in your country's heart, the death of the envoy is just a business transaction. If so, my daughter will really misunderstand whether the death of the envoy is a deliberate trap set by your country." The deputy envoy immediately refuted, "What nonsense are you talking about? How could my Southern Yang take the life of the envoy as a joke and do such a despicable thing?" Southern Yang was not afraid of war, but it could not ignore the country's face. Ning Shu smiled sweetly, "Who knows? That's right. My daughter is slow-witted and has little talent and knowledge, but before entering the palace, I have inquired. When the deputy envoy was in Southern Yang, he had a big conflict with the envoy. Now that the envoy is dead, and according to the courier, the deputy envoy did not return last night, this." Ning Shu rolled her eyes, and before the deputy envoy could get angry, she said, "Of course, my daughter absolutely believes in the deputy envoy's innocence. I believe that the deputy envoy will also give my daughter a chance and give her a few more days to solve this unsolved case." Ning Shu's words stabbed directly into the deputy envoy's heart, completely blocking his mouth, not giving him any chance to stir up any more trouble. The deputy envoy's face changed a few times, squinting at Ning Shu, and finally smiled maliciously, "What a clever little mouth. Originally, I was going to bring the 13th princess back to the country in 5 days, then this envoy will give you 2 more days. After 5 days, if you still can't give my country a satisfactory answer, then we will meet on the battlefield." Before flicking his sleeves and leaving, he looked back at Ning Shu. "What is your name?" Ning Shu slightly bent her knees, gracefully bowing, and said with a smile, "My daughter is Ning Shu. Please advise me, Deputy Envoy." "Good, I will remember you." Chapter 289. After leaving Zichen Palace Hall, Ning Shu let out a sigh of relief. She had been humiliated in front of Xiahou Qing every day. It had been a long time since she had been able to diss someone so happily. It felt pretty good. However, she soon began to have a headache again. No matter how happy she was to diss someone, it would not help her catch the murderer sooner. She would not naively hope that the envoy's death was due to theft or murder. Ever since this person entered the capital, he had been extremely high profile. In the brothels of the Western Market, in the restaurants of the Eastern Market, and in the pleasure boats on the moon-embracing river, there was no one who did not know his name. He was simply a walking signboard. Who would not be respectful and courteous to him? This signboard was known to be as cunning as a fox and as insidious as a snake. Such a person had died silently in the brothels of the brothels last night. It would be strange if it was not premeditated. She had solved such a sensitive murder case in 5 days. She was really grateful to His Majesty for his kindness. However, time was tight. She did not want to let go of even the blink of an eye. Ning Shu quickened her steps. Just as she was about to leave the palace, she heard someone call her from behind, "Lady Ning, wait for me." Ning Shu turned around. It was Tan Siwei. Before he could greet his colleagues, Tan Siwei jogged to Ning Shu's footsteps. He was happy for her from the bottom of his heart. It's great that you're out of prison. Ning Shu remembered Tan Siwei's kindness when he brought Hui Mo into prison. She smiled and thanked him. Thank you, Minister Tan, for taking care of my daughter. I heard that Minister Tan was the only one who spoke up for my daughter in Zichen Palace Hall. I am deeply grateful. When he met Ning Shu's bright eyes, Tan Siwei's baby face burned. No, it's nothing. It's nothing. Moreover, my ability is limited. I didn't really help Lady Ning. If Miss can solve this case smoothly, it will be a great favor to DAU, the Supreme Court, and the Ministry of Justice. Oh right, Lady Ning is going to start investigating the case, right? The envoy's body was being kept in the freezer of the Supreme Court. Would Miss like to conduct an autopsy first or go to the crime scene first? I can give you a lift. Just as Ning Shu was about to decline, someone was waiting for her outside the palace. But then she remembered that she was going to the Supreme Court for an autopsy anyway, so she nodded and said, then I'll have to trouble Xiaoqing Tan. I still have a capable helper waiting outside the palace. Xiaoqing, please allow us to go together. Of course, Tan Siwei said without thinking. As he spoke, his delicate baby face burned even hotter. He turned his head away and said with a lowered voice, I had a good chat with Miss in the Ministry of Justice's prison. You don't have to be so polite with me. Ning Shu was shocked. What the hell was that? She had been in prison for 7 days, but she had only seen Tan Siwei once. They had only exchanged a few words. What was going on? Hui Mo, you brat, what did you do behind my back? At the entrance of the palace, Hui Mo was leaning against the wall leisurely. After the false alarm, he was happy again. He was holding a piece of grass in his mouth and humming a tune that he had learned from somewhere. Suddenly, he sneezed loudly. He looked up and saw that the sun was shining brightly. Why did he feel a chill on his neck? He shrunk his neck. Suddenly, he had an animal instinct that reminded him that his life was in danger and he had to run away. But just as he took the first step, Ning Shu's cold voice came from behind. Good Hui Mo, sorry to keep you waiting. I'll have to trouble you later. Don't worry, after it's over, I'll thank you properly. Haha. Chapter 290. Ning Shu walked over and patted Huemo's shoulder gently. She whispered in his ear, I'll remember this. I'll settle it with you when I have time. Tears streamed down Huemo's face. However, he knew that he was in the wrong. He lowered his head and followed her like a little girl. No wonder Tianwen said that the envoy's death was extremely tragic. When they arrived at the ice room where the Supreme Court stored the bodies of the important victims, Ning Shu realized that it was not just tragic. It was too horrible to look at. There were 7 or 8 big holes in the envoy's body. His clothes were tattered and soaked in blood. His eyes were pierced and only 2 big bloody holes were left. His cheeks were scratched with blood. The most horrifying part was the lower half of the envoy's body. The most important organ of a man was also. Huemo trembled when he saw this. He instinctively protected himself. Oh my God. How much hatred did he have to bear to do such a thing? Ning Shu clicked her tongue and briefly expressed her condolences to him. It was no wonder that the deputy envoy of Zichen Palace Hall would be filled with righteous indignation and ask for 10 cities as compensation. This envoy's death was indeed too tragic. When a person dies, he must have a complete corpse. If he died without a complete corpse, he would have to line up at the bridge of helplessness with his severed head and limbs. His soul could only be repaired when he entered the cycle of reincarnation. She thought about the embarrassing situation of the envoy being surrounded by ghosts on the bridge of helplessness. Those who heard it would be sad and those who heard it would cry. Tan Siwei's face also turned pale. He felt sorry for the envoy. He knew that the current appearance of the envoy was much better. When he received the report in the morning and rushed to the crime scene, even the coroner, who was used to seeing all kinds of rotten corpses, turned around and vomited a few times. He thought that Ning Shu was a girl after all. She would be scared when she saw such a corpse. He said, Lady Ning, This corpse is really unsightly. Why don't you go to another room and rest for a while? I'll tell you the details when the autopsy results are out. Ning Shu shook her head and said, in a murder case, the corpse is the most important evidence and the least likely to lie. The key to solving a case is often hidden in the details. If I miss out on the most important details because of fear, then I should go back home and kowtow to His Majesty as soon as possible to ask for forgiveness. Don't worry, I've seen more tragic deaths. I'm not afraid. She said it so calmly that Tan Siwei had no reason to persuade her. At the same time, he respected her even more. Ning Shu walked a few steps towards the envoy. She looked at the corpse carefully and then reached out her hand to Huemore, gloves. Huemore blinked and said flatteringly, I'm here. How can I trouble Lady Ning to do it? Don't worry, just leave it to me. You just need to watch from the side. If there's anything you want to do, just let me know. At this time, if he didn't find a chance to make up for it, he would be finished when the case was solved and Lady Ning was free to deal with him. Thinking of the good things he did in the prison, Huemore's heart trembled. It was too late for him to regret it. Ning Shu glanced at him and said with a chuckle, all right, then you do it. Finally, he got a chance to show off. Huemore smiled and said, okay. Tan Siwei didn't even see his hand gesture clearly. All he saw was a row of autopsy tools neatly placed on the autopsy table. Putting on a pair of pig foam gloves, Huemore's eyes lit up as he bent down towards the corpse. Ning Shu, approximate time of death. Huemore, there are obvious livor mortis on the surface of the skin of the corpse. Based on the current weather and the spread of livor mortis, the corpse should have died between midnight and midnight last night. Ning Shu, how many wounds are there on the body? Which one is the fatal one? Huemore carefully checked the body from top to bottom and then turned to the back of the body. Let me see. There are 8 stabs in the chest and abdomen. Both eyes are stabbed 3 times. The eyeballs are burst. There are 2 words carved on the face. The strokes are stuck to each other. Let me wipe off the blood and take a look. Sin. Ning Shu, what about the other side? Huemore. It's also sin. Tan Siwei, slitting the face is one of the punishments for criminals. It sounds like a vendetta. Ning Shu, it's possible. Go on. Huemore, the lower part of the body was stabbed. The flesh was badly mutilated. I can't tell how many stabs there were. By visual estimation, there were at least 10 stabs. On the surface, the stab wounds on the chest and abdomen were the most frightening. However, when a person was stabbed before death, the wound would turn to the side due to the contraction of the surrounding skin and muscles. However, when a person was stabbed after death, the wound would not. Based on this, it could be inferred that these wounds were not fatal. The real fatal wound was. Huemore searched for a long time before he found a few red dots hidden in the envoy's hair. Here it is. My God, there were 3 extremely long embroidery needles. They pierced into the Baihui acupoint on the top of the head and stirred up the brain. Chapter 291. My God, this method of killing is too ruthless. The embroidery needle piercing into the brain won't kill the person instantly. Instead, the person will experience extreme pain before dying. This person must have hated him to the core to make him die in such a tragic manner. But this is too strange. The envoy is more than 7 feet tall and strong. How could he be killed like a chicken? Even if he was drunk last night, it doesn't make sense. Even if he was dead asleep, he would still wake up and fight back after suffering great pain. As Huemore spoke, Ning Shu recorded the key points. Check his throat and stomach for undigested food residue. See if there are any knockout drugs or some kind of poison. By the way, check if these embroidery needles have been smeared with poison. Okay. Huemore took out a set of silver needles and slid them down the throat of the corpses one by one. None of them were found to be poisoned. He then took out a sharp knife and cut open the abdomen of the corpses. As soon as the stomach was opened, a sour and stinky smell rushed out. How much did the envoy eat last night? How much did he drink last night? This smell is simply. Ning Shu quickly folded the cloth next to her and handed it to him. Then, She took one for herself and Tan Siwei to cover their mouths and noses. Hui Mo worked for a long time and said excitedly, "Just now, I put the needles and the mucus in the envoy's stomach into the juice of the purple grass. The color has changed from the original blue to purple. I suspect that the envoy was poisoned with the fragrant bone softening powder. No wonder he was so obedient. It turns out that he could not move at all. This is not easy to get. The murderer has really put in a lot of effort. Embroidery needles, no offspring. The murderer must be a woman. This is definitely because the envoy has done something heartless and despicable, and the young lady has come to take revenge on him. Embroidery needles, fragrant bone softening powder, blinded eyes, carved words on the face, 8 wounds, no offspring. These keywords gradually turned into scattered pieces. Ning Shu tried to piece them together in her mind, trying to simulate the basic process of the murderer last night. Because of her rapid thinking, her face was extremely calm, like a glossy and flawless crystal gem. Your deduction is reasonable. However, they couldn't be too arbitrary. Sometimes, some clever murderers would take advantage of people's usual logic and do the opposite. They would deliberately set up a smoke screen to trick people so that they could get away with it. Before we find more solid evidence, we can't rule out a group of suspects. That's true. Some murderers are very cunning and good at setting traps for the government. Hui Mo nodded and took off his dirty and smelly gloves. The body has been examined. That's all we can find. Should we go to the crime scene to see if there are any more clues? Or do you want to interrogate the guests and girls from last night? Ning Shu thought for a moment and said, "Let's go take a look at the crime scene first. We have to familiarize ourselves with the layout and structure of Xuanfang Station to understand the whole process of the crime and see if we can rule out some suspects." Ning Shu felt a headache when she thought of the long list of suspects. What kind of place was Xuanfang Station? There were hundreds of girls, maids, and pimps, plus the guests who came to have fun. But she only had 5 days. God, you are really good at giving me problems. They packed up and covered the body with the white cloth again. When the white cloth covered the upper body of the envoy, Ning Shu looked at it and suddenly said, "What's on his neck?" "On his neck?" Hui Mo bent down and looked at it carefully. "Let me see. Oh, it's a few scratches. But the wounds have healed and the scabs are almost gone. It seems that it has been there for a while. It should have nothing to do with the murder last night." Ning Shu nodded and continued to think. Embroidery needles, carved words, no offspring, blinded eyes. Why did she vaguely feel that these words were inexplicably familiar, as if she had seen them before? Where was it? Chapter 292. With a stomach full of questions, Ning Shu and Hui Mo walked out of the Dali temple. Ning Shu politely saluted, "Shaoqing Tan, please stay. We can go to Xuanfang Station by ourselves. The people related to the case are all in the Dali temple. After you carefully interrogate them, please tell my daughter the results." She couldn't count on the Ministry of Justice. In the case of old Princess Yu, Wang Han showed obvious hostility to her. Today, His Majesty asked her to solve the case. She heard that it was Wang Han who pushed her into the fire pit. She would be thankful if he didn't hit her when she was down. Chen Zicheng of the Jingji Prefecture also had a grudge with her before. So her only hope was in the Dali Temple. Tan Siwei had a delicate and amiable baby face, but he was much more loyal than the others when it came to doing things. For the convenience of investigating the case, she tied up all her hair into a single spiral bun. She only wore a white jade hairpin in the shape of a jade rabbit. Her entire neck was exposed, looking clear and elegant. When she nodded, she slightly lowered her head, so her slender white neck was outlined by the collar into a beautiful crescent moon shape. Tan Siwei only glanced at it and hurriedly looked away. He said in a hurry, "This is my duty as an official. Miss, you don't have to treat me like an outsider. Moreover, I'm flattered to have the opportunity to work with you to solve such a big case. By the way, the murderer of this case is extremely cruel. I'm afraid the process of solving the case will be very dangerous. Please be careful." His eyes were watery and his words were sincere, like a shy girl. This appearance made Ning Shu even more suspicious. She immediately glanced sharply at Hui Mo, who was desperately hiding beside her, as if to say, "You better explain to me what's going on later. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless." "Ha ha. Xiaoqing Daren is too polite. Thank you." "Ah, you're too polite. No need." Yes, you're too polite." Ning Shu braced herself and chatted with Tan Siwei. Just when she was about to leave, she saw Forsythia's carriage stopped in front of the Dali temple. Her mother and Princess Xin came down from the carriage with a smile. Ning Shu's eyes lit up in surprise, and she was about to go forward to help him up. Princess Hixin covered her mouth with a handkerchief and laughed. She joked, "Shu, you are too polite. Why are you treating Xiaoqing like an outsider? We are going to be a family in the future anyway." "What? What is mother talking about? Why can't I understand?" Ning Shu's smile stiffened. Princess Hixin walked over and intimately held Ning Shu's hand and patted it. "Shua, are you shy? Didn't mother mention it to you before? Your father and I both felt that Prime Minister Tan's youngest son, Tan Xiaoqing, was extremely good in both appearance and character. Thus, we spoke to the Prime Minister and his wife. Later, you were summoned into the palace by the Empress and were thrown into the prison of the Ministry of Justice because of your crimes. Mother was extremely worried and thought that the marriage was over. She didn't expect that Tan Xiaoqing didn't mind at all. Instead, he took the initiative to propose marriage when we were at our lowest point. How could your father and I not agree? We were just waiting for you to come out of prison to tell you the good news." But Ning Shu was extremely anxious. Just as she was about to speak, she was interrupted by Princess Hixin. "But what? Oh, mother knows. It must be because you are embarrassed to say this in front of Tan Xiaoqing. It's mother's fault. I forgot about this. Good. Xiaoqing still has official business to attend to, so we won't disturb him." Princess Hixin nodded slightly at Tan Siwei. Tan Siwei hurriedly performed a junior's greeting. Then, with a red face, he bowed to Ning Shu and went back to interrogate the suspects. After Tan Siwei left, Ning Shu finally had a chance to speak. "Mother, why didn't you discuss this marriage with me in advance? Why did you decide it in such a hurry?" Princess Hixin revealed a surprised expression. "On the 15th day of last year, you were playing on the swing. While playing, you suddenly fell from the swing and fell unconscious. Mother waited by your side for 3 days and 3 nights before you woke up. When you woke up, the first thing you said was, 'Please ask me and your father to quickly arrange a marriage for you. As long as it wasn't from the imperial family, you wouldn't object to any family's young master.' At that time, we thought you were muddle-headed from the fall and said something stupid. You swore to the heavens, 'Everything will be decided by me and your father. Even if you are crippled and stupid, you are willing to marry. Otherwise, you will be struck by lightning.' Only then did we take it seriously. Previously, your father helped you find a match for young General Song, third young Master Qi, and later Cloud Leaf. You didn't have any objections. Unfortunately, there were many accidents later and the marriage never came to fruition. Now, Prime Minister Tan's family's young master took the initiative to propose marriage. This is such a rare thing. It would be difficult to find a more suitable candidate than Tan Xiaoqing. Moreover, Tan Xiaoqing also said that you had a good chat with him in prison. What's wrong? Is Shua blaming Nyang Qin? Chapter 293. No, I'm not blaming you, it's just that. Suddenly, such an unexpected thing fell from the sky, making Ning Shu completely stupefied. She doesn't know what to say and only feels her heart is in a mess. She sighs softly and says, "You should know that the person who has been staying in prison is not me. Nyang Qin knows that it wasn't you, but Nyang Qin also knows that if it wasn't for Tan Xiaoqing's help, you wouldn't have been able to get out of prison, right?" Princess Hixin holds Ning Shu's hand. Her eyes, which have always been as gentle as water, at this moment, have a different kind of clarity. Ning Shu opens her mouth, but is unable to say anything. Because what her mother said was right. Those words were indeed said by her, and that oath was also made by her. At that time, She had just returned to her first life by King Chujiang. The moment she opened her eyes, she saw her parents who gave birth to her, raised her, loved her, and protected her. For a moment, she was so emotional that her throat choked up, and she could only silently shed 2 lines of tears. That 300 years of heaven's punishment, 7 lives, and 7 lives that won't end well, constantly lingered in her mind. Therefore, she made an ambition. In this life, she would never touch that beautiful and repulsive word love. She would find someone to marry, endure the curse of 17 years old, protect her family, and then peacefully live a life of idleness, eating and waiting for death, enjoying life to her heart's content. But she never thought that she would meet that person. And after meeting him, can she really be as free and easy as before? Her heart, which has always been firm, is now violently shaken. Ning Shu's eyes absent-mindedly flash, and her fingernails deeply dig into her palms. Shu, you have just been released from prison, so I should have taken you back to the Fu to wash away the dust in the brazier. But Nyang Qin knows that you are anxious to solve the case, so Nyang Qin can only do something simple. The carriage has prepared water soaked in grapefruit leaves for you to wash your hands. Also, this red string was specially requested by Mother from the Xianghua temple. Hurry up and tie it. Remember to wrap it around 3 times. Her mother's worried exhortations continued to ring in her ears. She raised her head and suddenly saw a slender figure standing under a tall and lush camphor tree on the opposite side of the road. His long belt and black brocade tail fluttered in the warm wind. With Ju Sai's support, he silently faced her direction. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. Ning Shu's heart suddenly stopped. It was Xiahou Qing. She couldn't help but take a step in his direction. As if sensing her footsteps, he whispered to Ju Sai, "Let's go." He quickly boarded the carriage of the Nanping mansion. Princess Hixin asked in shock, "Shua, what are you doing?" Ning Shu had already chased after them, but the more she chased, the faster the carriage went. Ju Sai looked back and said, "Shizzy, Miss Ning is still chasing after us." Inside the closed curtain, Xiahou Qing's voice didn't have a trace of warmth. "Then go faster." "Yes." Ning Shu watched the familiar carriage blend into the crowd and the traffic. It shrank into a small black spot until it could no longer be seen. She stopped and held her chest, panting violently. Hui Mo also followed. He knew that he was in the wrong, so he shrank beside her and didn't dare to say anything. Ning Shu turned back and said angrily, "What did you talk about with Tan Siwei in the prison of the Ministry of Justice?" Hui Mo stammered, "No, nothing. I said that Tan Siwei is young and talented, and I admire him very much. Lady Ning, I really didn't want to frame you. I just wanted to cheat some delicious food and fun things from him to pass the time." Who knew that he couldn't stand teasing? He blushed when I teased him, so Ning Shu sneered, "So you were addicted to teasing him?" I didn't do it on purpose." Hui Mo held his head and said, "Didn't the outside world say that he was flexible and tactful? At first, I thought he was pretending to be stupid, so I wanted to expose his true colors. But I didn't expect that he was really stupid. Lady Ning, I really know I was wrong. Please forgive me." Ning Shu said angrily, "I was really killed by you." Chapter 294. Miss, I see that your forehead is full and your cheeks are slightly red. You are going to have a lot of luck with men recently. Do you want to know when you will meet your destined one? You just need to give me some money and I will do it for you. As soon as Ning Shu arrived at the West Market where Xuanfeng Terrace was located, she was stopped by a fake Taoist priest. Hearing the words luck with men, Ning Shu's forehead bulged and her molars became cold. She said coldly, "My face is red because I ran away just now. My forehead is full because I was angry. As for money, I don't have a single copper coin with me. If you want money, you can go to the Emperor or Duke Ning to ask for it. As for fortune-telling, I have learned it, but I learned to calculate people's lifespan." Taoist priest, "Do you want me to do it for you for free?" When the fake Daoist priest heard this, he hurriedly put away the fortune-telling banner and moved to the side with his tail between his legs. Then, He and the other passers-by stared with wide eyes as she walked into the alley and into the Fang-seeking platform that was tightly surrounded by officials. He suddenly realized that no wonder she was so difficult to deal with. It turned out that she was the famous female general who brought bad luck to her husband and was sent by His Majesty to investigate the case of the envoy's murder, Ning Shu. It was said that the envoy's death really made people shiver. Although they didn't earn any copper coins, there was a good show to watch. It was not a loss. Lady Ning, there is water on the ground and the road is slippery. Please come this way. Hui Mo was very cautious along the way, but he still tried to please his wife. Ning Shu, who had been silent all the way, finally stopped and gave him a look. Hui Mo promised seriously, Lady Ning, don't worry. I am the one who caused this trouble. I will explain it to His Highness. Ning Shu smiled bitterly. He could explain it clearly, but the engagement had been fixed. Even if he explained 1,000 times, he couldn't turn back time and tear up the engagement. Thinking of the silent figure of Xiaoho Qing under the camphor tree and the scene of the carriage of Prince Nanping's mansion disappearing in front of her eyes, she suddenly had a headache. However, due to the urgency of the situation, they could only put the matter of the engagement aside for the time being and wait for the case to end in 5 days before considering a solution. Ning Shu took a deep breath and cleared her mind temporarily. She forced herself to calm down and deal with the current situation. Let's talk about it later. Let's investigate the case first. She was indebted to Hui Mo. Now that things had come to this, it was meaningless to haggle over it. Hui Mo was moved to tears. Yes, I will definitely perform well. Hui Mo was responsible for observing the terrain around the platform. Ning Shu walked up the stairs and boarded the platform. She said to the officer who was responsible for guarding the platform, "Did you bring the brothel mother here? I heard that the first young Master Tan was the one who arranged the banquet last night. I'll have to trouble you to make a trip to the Prime Minister's residence and say that Ning Shu invited you." The officer said, "The first young master heard that Lady Ning was coming to investigate the case early in the morning, so he came here to wait for you. He is now in the middle of the platform." As soon as the officer finished speaking, a blue figure came out from the middle of the platform. Ning Shu looked up and saw Tan Xixian's iconic peach blossom eyes with his usual smile. But the smile was inevitably bitter today. Seeing Ning Shu, he first bowed to her and said politely, "Greetings, Lady Ning. The first young master is too polite. My daughter Ning Shu greets the first young master." After Ning Shu returned the greeting, Tan Xixian turned sideways and opened his hands to invite Ning Shu in. While leading the way for Ning Shu, he said apologetically, "Thank you, Lady Ning. Speaking of which, last night's banquet was arranged by the first young master at the request of the first young master. I didn't expect that such a thing would happen. The first young master. Alas, in the end, it's my fault. I didn't arrange enough guards in advance. I can't shirk the responsibility of the first young master's death. I'm sorry to have caused trouble to Lady Ning." Ning Shu also said politely, "The first young master helped because of the kindness of others. It happened so suddenly. How could the first young master know that someone would secretly kill the first young master? Please don't blame yourself." Ning Shu and Tan Xixian had met a total of 2 times before. Her impression of this person was neither good nor bad. She only felt that this person was smooth and slick in dealing with people. No matter where she was, with whom she was with, she would be considerate and not offend anyone. For example, when the first young master stared at her hand and said something offensive, he was the one who smoothed things over. Another example was the death of the first young master. There were so many young masters who attended last night's banquet, including the 7th prince. They all wanted to hide as far away as possible. However, he was waiting for her here early in the morning and even took the responsibility for it. He was smooth and slick, but he didn't lie. Coupled with his good looks, it was hard to dislike him. Chapter 295. Tan Siwei said gratefully, "Thank you, Lady Ning, for your understanding and forgiveness. The place where the envoy met with his accident was on the balcony above here." Ning Shu nodded and followed him up the wooden stairs. The The Seeking Fragrance platform was 8 jong tall and had 3 floors. Each floor had a different purpose. The first floor was mainly used to attract ordinary customers. There was a stage in the middle of the lobby. At the top of the stage, there was a huge lotus-glazed lamp. It was beautiful and magnificent. At first glance, one could tell that it was an expensive item imported from the western regions. Dozens of tables and chairs surrounded the platform. Every night, the customers could enjoy the beautiful singing and dancing performances of the girls at close range. The second floor was the balcony and the greenhouse for most of the ladies. When the guests were satisfied with the performances, they would enter the room with the ladies they liked. The purpose of this was unknown. The third floor was a private room that was specially used to receive distinguished guests. It was the residence of the 8 leading ladies of the Xuanfang Terrace. In addition, there was a wide terrace facing the south. The arrangement was extremely gorgeous. There was not a single thing lacking. At the western corner of the terrace, there was even a small bamboo forest that could be worth 1 or 2 taels of gold per inch. Many guests who liked to sing about the wind and moon would come here to guide the galaxy and drink and sing. This was also a big selling point that Xuanfang TV had always been proud of. Last night, the envoy from the southern Yang kingdom who came from afar died here. His blood soaked the thick wooden floor and dripped onto the private seats on the second floor. The weather was hot. In order to preserve his body, the envoy's body had been moved to the ice house of the Supreme Court. What was left in front of Ning Shu was a pool of dried and black blood. Smelling the blood, the flies flew over and feasted on the blood. She couldn't chase them away. The splashes around the pool of blood clearly showed how horrible the envoy's death was last night. There seemed to be a few pieces of flesh mixed in the pool of blood. There was half a footprint beside the pool of blood. She didn't know if it was the envoy's own, or if it was accidentally stepped on by the frightened pimp this morning. Or if it was the murderer. She still needed to verify. Other than the pool of blood, the surroundings were not too messy. Only a few pots of orchids were overturned in the corner. On the long table not far away, the unfinished wine cups from last night were still there. All kinds of delicacies had lost their original taste due to being placed there for a long time and were gradually rotting under the warm sunlight. The officer in charge of guarding the crime scene said, "The procuress said that the guests came here to have fun. After a night of fun, most of them will sleep until noon. So in order not to disturb the guests, they will come here in the afternoon to clean up." Ning Shu calculated the distance between the rooms of the top hostesses and this place. She said, "Based on what you said, if the blood didn't drip down, they probably wouldn't have found out that the envoy had died here until the afternoon." "Yes." Ning Shu put on a pair of gloves and picked up the fragments of the flower pot that had been knocked over. She analyzed the direction of the force and said, "Eldest young master, I'll have to trouble you to tell me the details of last night's banquet." "I will definitely tell you everything I know," Tan Sixian said slowly in a gentle voice. "It's like this. The envoy has been on a diplomatic mission to Great Yu for more than a month and his return date is near. So before he leaves, he prepared to invite many friends he made here to show his gratitude." Ning Shu put the pieces back to their original position and continued to check the next corner. She thought, "Friends? They're just a bunch of bad friends." The envoy said that the etiquette between Southern Yang and Great Yu is different. He was afraid of being neglected, so he asked me to share his burden. To be honest, I have an ulterior motive for getting close to the envoy recently. I want to use him to open up a trade route with Southern Yang and make a lot of money. If he has a request, I can't refuse it." Ning Shu nodded to express her understanding. The way of business has always been like this. Tan Sixian was frank. Xuanfang Terrace was a place that the envoy chose himself. Because Lady Susu and Lady Drinking Snow here are outstanding, the envoy was quite fond of them. This terrace is also a golden signboard in the West Market. Ordinary people may not be able to enter even if they throw gold at it. Before the envoy leaves the capital, he must fulfill his wish. Because I deal in silk, tea, and the Western region spices and glass business, I have a lot of contacts with the procuress of Xuanfang Terrace. So, I helped pull the strings and got the opportunity to admire the moon on the terrace. Last night at 5:30 p.m., The golden crow was about to fall and the glass lanterns were lit. When the seventh prince arrived, the sound of musical instruments and the banquet officially began. Chapter 296. Ning Shu asked, "Who exactly attended the banquet last night?" In addition to the seventh prince and me, there was also Minister Zhao of the Secretariat, Minister Liu of Qingche, the third son of Assistant Minister Wang, the eldest son of Secretary Sima, and the fourth son of Minister Jiang. Tan Xixian reported a string of names and then continued, "Last night, other than admiring the moon and drinking and having fun, we didn't do anything out of the ordinary." The seventh prince was the first to leave. Because he was afraid that the emperor would punish him, he hurried back to the palace at 7. The rest of us stayed until 9 and then left one after another. Ning Shu asked directly, "Who was the last to leave? What time was it? And who stayed at the Xuanfeng terrace?" Tan Xixian coughed awkwardly and said, "I should be the last to leave. It was about 8:45. After sending the rest of the officials and young masters out, I left. The ones who stayed at the terrace should be Minister Liu, Child Sima, Child Wang, Child Jiang, and myself. According to what you said, the envoy should have stayed at the top house last night. Why did he come back to the terrace? I wasn't there after that. I was shocked when I heard that the envoy was killed this morning, so I immediately rushed over. As for what the envoy and the other young masters did after that, I really don't know. Then which top house did the envoy choose last night? If I remember correctly, it should be Miss Susu." Ning Shu nodded. Seeing that Huemore had finished checking the surrounding terrain, she hurriedly waved her hand and asked him to come over. She asked him to check the leftovers, wine jugs, and wine glasses. After checking, Huemore shook his head at Ning Shu in disappointment. Although Ning Shu was mentally prepared, she still couldn't help but feel disappointed. She glanced around and suddenly found half a plate of leftover roast mutton. Before I came, I looked at the menu of the Xuanfeng terrace. It didn't seem to be this dish. Tan Xixian glanced at it and said, "Oh, I bought it separately. It's in the restaurant across the street." His family's roast mutton was especially famous. It was personally roasted by a chef from the western regions. The taste was especially different from ours, and the aroma could be smelled from far away. The seventh prince had just arrived and said that he wanted to eat. How could the envoy not be satisfied? Hence, he instructed the servants to buy some for him. When the owner of the restaurant heard that His Highness the seventh prince had come, he was very attentive. He ordered the waiter to keep an eye on the chef and send it over as soon as it was done. When it was sent upstairs, it was still boiling hot. The taste was indeed extraordinary. What about the waiter? He left after delivering the mutton. After carefully inspecting every corner of the balcony, Ning Shu looked at the exquisitely decorated balcony that was filled with blood. She was silent for a long time. Then she turned her head and looked seriously at Tan Xixian. "Eldest young master, please tell me honestly. After coming to the capital, has the envoy made enemies with anyone, offended anyone, or done anything inappropriate?" Tan Xixian was stunned for a moment. He pursed his lips and didn't speak. After a while, he said, "It is not a gentleman's behavior to speak ill of others behind their backs. However, this matter concerns the cause of the envoy's death. I can only be a villain for once. After the envoy came to the capital, he often went to brothels. Most of the time, he was accompanied by me. Even when he was drunk, I would persuade him from the side. There was only one time when I saw a few fresh scratches on the envoy's neck. Out of curiosity, I asked what happened. The envoy replied, "Last night on the road, I ran into a little wild cat that threw itself into my arms. I wanted to have some fun with it, but I was scratched by the little wild cat. As for the identity of the little wild cat that you speak of, I have no way of knowing." Ning Shu frowned. Does eldest young master remember what day of the month it was when the envoy said this? "The 9th day of the 5th month. The 9th day of the 5th month." Ning Shu kept this date in her mind. Suddenly, she remembered the weak and desperate cry she heard not long ago by the Chaobai River. Jade hairpin flower, Xuanfeng terrace, Lady Susu, could it be her? Chapter 297. Seeing Ning Shu was silent for a long time, Tan Xixian whispered, "Lady Ning?" Ning Shu quickly regained her senses. Tan Xixian curiously asked, "Miss, have you found any clues?" That matter was just her guess and she couldn't make a conclusion. In order to avoid involving an innocent girl, Ning Shu said, "Not yet, I'm just thinking about some things." "Thank you for your help today, eldest young master." Eldest young master must have a lot of business to do, so I won't disturb eldest young master. It's just a small matter. If I can help, it's my honor. Then I'll leave first. If Miss needs anything, I'll be there in a moment. After sending Tan Xixian away, Hui Mo smacked his lips with great interest. He pinched his chin and commented, "The outside world says that Prime Minister Tan's second son is smooth and slick in dealing with people. But I think it's the complete opposite. That guy is obviously a fool. But this eldest son is gentle and elegant. He knows when to advance and retreat. He doesn't look like a businessman who falls into the eyes of copper coins. If such a person enters the officialdom, the Tan family will probably have another prime minister. What a pity." As soon as Tan Xixian was mentioned, Ning Shu's mind exploded again. She chuckled, "Instead of talking about other people's family matters, it's better to help me find clues. I just asked you to check the surrounding terrain. What's the result? Oh, look at my brain. I forgot about the important matter." Hui Mo patted his forehead and took out a map from his arms. "This fang-seeking platform is located in the northeast corner of the West City. It's backed by the upper reaches of the Chaobai River. Look, the place we are standing is the best place to enjoy the view of the Chaobai River. The front door is facing this restaurant called Dong Lai Shun. There are 2 alleys on both sides. The left side is a tiled house, and the right side is another brothel called Bai Hua Lu. According to the surrounding people, these 2 brothels are famous in the West City for not getting along with each other. When the news of the envoy's sudden death spread out, the brothel owner of Bai Hua Lu laughed until her mouth was crooked. Although Hui Mo looked careless and unreliable, he was very meticulous in his work. On the map, he marked the terrain around the Search Fang platform in great detail. He even marked the width of the alley, the number of doors and windows around it, and the distance to the tile shack and Bai Hua building. Ning Shu looked at it seriously for a while, then tapped on the drawing with her finger. "There are small doors on both the east and west sides of the platform. Why isn't there any on the side near the river? Xuanfang Terrace is built next to the Chaobai River. Below the 8 steps is the river bank. The reason why they didn't set up a small door here is probably because they were afraid that drunken customers would accidentally slip into the river. Also, the brothel keeper purposely set up a fence near the river, probably for the same reason. What you mean is that if you want to enter the seeker platform, you have to go from the east, west, and south sides. You definitely can't come up from the north side of the river." Hui Mo nodded vigorously, "I've seen it. The embankment is 40 feet high. Below the embankment is the turbulent waves of the Chaobai River. If you want to climb up the embankment, I'm afraid your Qinggong will be able to reach the sky." Ning Shu nodded in understanding and asked the officer next to her, "Are all the small doors guarded?" "Of course. When I caught them this morning, I asked them. They are in this kind of business. What they are most afraid of is that people come to make trouble and customers don't pay and run away. Therefore, every door is guarded, and the guards are all sharp-eyed. Not only that, last night, the envoys invited all the guests to the banquet. Therefore, young Master Tan specially arranged people to guard the stairs connecting the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor to prevent some drunken people from making trouble in the private rooms upstairs and disturbing the guests." Hui Mo blinked. "According to what you said, outsiders can't sneak in to commit murder, and people on the 1st and 2nd floor can't enter the 3rd floor. The murderer must be the young master of the aristocratic family who stayed last night, or one of the leading ladies. Then the list of suspects has been narrowed down a lot." The officer smiled bitterly and said, "If it were really that simple, we would be able to solve this case by ourselves. The problem is that the young masters who stayed here last night testified against each other. After they went into their rooms to rest, they didn't come out again. They were even woken up by the screams of the pimp. Even Miss Susu, who is the most suspicious, has a witness. She said that she didn't serve the envoys well last night and made the envoys unhappy. The envoys slapped her and slammed the door. Susu's maid came in and comforted her for a long time. Then, the two of them slept in the same room. Young Master Wang next door also testified that he heard the noise, but he was too drunk to come out. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.